Tribal organization. Gentes, the version of the origin legend by Tall Chanter here given, accounts for only 38 gentes among the Navajos, but this informant was able to name, in all, 43 gentes, 2 of which, he said, were extinct. Lists of the Navajo gentes have been obtained from various sources, and no single authority has been found to give a greater number than this. But no two lists are quite alike. They differ with regard to small or extinct gentes, and one list may supply a name which another has omitted. There would be at least 51 gentes extant and extinct in the tribe if each name so far obtained represented a different organization. But we find in the legend instances of a gens having 2 names. On the other hand, it is possible that none of the lists may be complete. Gentes derived from women of alien races, added to the tribe since it has grown numerous and widely scattered, may exist in one part of the Navajo country unknown to the best informed persons in another part. Extinct gentes may be forgotten by one informant and remembered by another. The following is a list of the 43 gentes named by Tall Chanter. 1. Sidiziankaini, House of the Black Cliffs, Pars 2. Sitlani, Bend in a Canyon. 3. Desalonodilani, Encircled Mountain. 4. Haskanatso, Haskanatsodin, Much Yucca. 5. Naapani, Brown Streak, Horizontal on the Ground. 6. Sinitzini, Black Horizontal Forest. 7. The Niza, the Nezani, Among the Scattered Hills. 8. Siltlani, Base of the Mountain. 9. The Paha, the Pahadin, Among the Waters, Par 3 at Sek. 10. Zayiski Ni, Sagebrush Hill. 11. Si Zindii, Trap Dyke. 12. Clogi, Clogidine, name of an old pueblo. 13. Tuhani, beside the water. 14. The Tsini, among the red waters or banks. 15. Kaikading, willows. 16. Kinlitsi, Kinlitzidine, red house of stone. 17. Destsini, red streak. 18. Tlassini, red flat. 19. Nota, Noteding, Ute. 20. Nakai, Nakaiding, white stranger, Mexican. 21. Tietlani, junction of the rivers. 22. Haltso, Haltsoding, yellow bodies. 23. Taditsini, bitter water. 24. Mitodine, Coyote Spring. 25. Hasley Zani, Hasley's Dean, mud. 26. Tudokonsi, saline water, Parnote. 27. Bitani, folded arms. 28. Sinsekatni, lone tree. 29. Pinbito, Pinbitodine, deer spring. 30. Sinehapilani, overhanging rocks. 31. Anagani, place of walking. 32. Kainani, high standing house. 33. Tabuznez, Tabuznazi, two come for water. 34. Nanis Zin, black horizontal stripe aliens, Zuni. 35. Dildzihi, not translated. 36. Asihi, Asiadine, salt. 37. Medeskizi, Medeskizini, Coyote Pass, Hemas. 38. Siyanatoni, extinct, horizontal water under cliffs. 39. Tutsoni, great water. 40. Baitani or Tsiltani, brow of mountain. 41. Siyike, Siyikadine, rocks standing near one another. 42. Tlizalani, many goats. 43. Tuzalsaitaya, extinct, water under the sitting frog. The following are 8 names obtained from other sources and not mentioned by Tall Chanter. 44. Atsazni, narrow gorge. 45. Ne'edin, monocline. 46. Beads. 47. Kanani, living arrows. 48. Sithani, among the rocks. 49. Lokadine, reeds, phragmites. 50. Dskizeni, rocky pass. 51. Hoganlani, many huts. More than one translation of a Gentile name has often been noted, but in the above lists only one translation is given, that which the author regards with the most favor. Often, too, different narrators account differently for the origin of the Gentile names. Some of the translations are very liberal, and others, again, very brief, but in the paragraphs and notes to which the reader is referred, he will find fuller explanations. The Navajo sometimes, but not invariably, add, as shown in the above lists, a suffix, dene, ni, or I, signifying people, but in the above translations, to simplify the study, the word people is omitted. There are reasons, which the author has set forth in a previous essay and will not now repeat, for believing that most of the Navajo gentes were originally local exogamous groups and not true gentes according to Morgan's definition 3. There is little doubt that, in the majority of cases, if not in all, the names of Navajo gentes, which are not the names of tribes, are simply designations of localities, even where the legend states to the contrary, as for instance when it tells us that certain gentes of the Western immigrants were named from words that women uttered when they first tasted of the magic fountains. On the other hand, there are passages in the legend which indicate that a few of the Navajo gentes were once totemic, although no evidence of clan totems is known to exist among the Navajos at the present time, and it is not improbable that a few of the Gentile names may be of totemic origin, although they are now accounted for in other ways in the origin legend. The passage which tells us that Essanatohi gave certain pets to the wanderers from the west, and that these pets accompanied the people on their journey, refers in all probability to the former use of totemic clan symbols, and possibly to a custom of keeping live totemic animals in captivity, a custom prevalent among the ancient Mexicans and the modern Pueblos, though not among the modern Navajos. Other indications of a former totemism may be found in the story of the Deer Spring people. Par note, see, also note. In reading the 4th chapter of the origin legend, Growth of the Navajo Nation, one is impressed with the different degrees of willingness, on both sides, with which new gentes are adopted into the nation. In some instances, two parties, meeting for the first time, embrace one another and become friends at once. The clans from the Pacific coast, the Western immigrants, as they are here called, learn of the existence of kindred tribes far to the east, take a long and dangerous journey to join them, and, when their march is done, they are received by the Navajos at once as brethren. On the other hand, the legend tells us of bands that camp long in the neighborhood of the Navajos before they become incorporated with the latter, of other clans descended from captives, and of others that seek refuge among the Navajos only to escape starvation or persecution at home. On the basis of their mode of adoption, the clans may be divided into the ready and the reluctant. The cause of this is probably one of language. Bands which we know to have been allied in language to the Navajos, such as those derived from the Apaches, will be found among the ready, while bands which we know to have spoken languages very different to the Navajo, such as those derived from the Utes, from Zuni, and Hemas, will be found among the reluctant. It is not unreasonable to conclude that the same rule applies to clans of whose original language we know nothing. Phratries. The gentes of the Navajos are divided into a number of groups, each of which may be called a phratry. Authorities in the tribe differ as to the number of the phratries, and as to the gentes that compose them. Some make but 8 phratries. Captain Burke, too, has obtained a list of 11, with 3 independent gentes. Some of the Navajos say there are 12 phratries, and suggest that they have some relation to the 12 tribes who dwelt in the first world. But the Navajo phratry seems not to be a homogeneous organization. A case is mentioned in the legend, where a gens has changed its fratral affinities. Inquiry, too, has revealed that there are subgroups. There may be closer bonds of alliance among some gentes in a group than there are among others in the same group. Authorities, then, may differ without invalidating each other's testimony. These groups are indicated in the legend when it says that one gens has become closely related or affiliated with another, pars 4 et al., or when it says that 2 gentes cannot intermarry. If the Navajos have a term equivalent to phratry, it has not been discovered. They have no special names for the different phratries. They often, but not always, speak of a phratry by the name of the most important gens in it. If the legend is to be taken as evidence, phratries have developed among the Navajos both by segmentation of gentes and by the addition of new gentes from without, not by either method exclusively. But legendary evidence is not needed to show that gentes which bear today the names of alien tribes have been additions to the phratry. Forbidden degrees of kindred. A Navajo belongs to the gens of his mother and takes the name of that gens. Cases have been noted where a Navajo has been known by his Gentile name and not by any other. No man may marry one of his own gens, neither may he marry one of his own phratry, though some exceptions seem to be made in the latter case where the limits of the phratry are not well defined. Where this descent in the female line exists among other tribes, it is held by some ethnographers that the man does not regard his father or his father's people as his relations, and may contract a marriage with a woman of his father's gens. Such is certainly not the case among the Navajos. The gens in the phratry of the father are as much forbidden kindred as those of the mother. Religion. Sources of information. That the Navajos have a religion, an elaborate pagan cult, has already been intimated. There is little to be gained by asking a Navajo direct questions about this. Learned controversialists and theologians, capable of analyzing and discussing their faith, have not arisen among them, or, if they have, they cannot easily communicate their philosophy to us. But the civilized scholar has abundant material from which to study their religion, and he must do the analyzing himself. In the great dry paintings shown on the floors of the medicine lodges, during their long ceremonies, may be seen pictures of many of the gods, with their hieratic belongings. In the ceremonies, or so-called dances, men are masked to represent gods. In the myths, the acts and deeds of the divine ones are described, and we learn their thoughts and feelings, kind like Indians to their kindred, usually cruel, yet often merciful and magnanimous to their foes. In the countless songs of the rites may be found the poetic side of the divine characters, and in the long prayers we may learn their potency, and discover how man hopes to commune with them and gain their favor. No supreme God. The religion of this people reflects their social condition. Their government is democratic. There is no highest chief of the tribe, and all their chiefs are men of temporary and ill-defined authority, whose power depends largely on their personal influence, their oratory, and their reputation for wisdom. It is difficult for such a people to conceive of a supreme God. Their gods, like their men, stand much on a level of equality. Sun God. In the version of the origin legend here given, the sun god would seem to have some precedence over the others, but in the beginning he was only one of the people. He never figures conspicuously as a creator, and is far from omnipotent. Other gods, less potent or less respected, lived before the time of man, and were powerful before the sun was made. Creation. The legend begins with an already created world. There is no original creation, and no creator of all. If the Navajos have a story of the beginning of all things, the author has not learned it. To a god called Bekotsidiai is given the credit of having made all animals whose creation is not otherwise accounted for in the myths, especially domestic animals. Some of the Indians who have heard vaguely of our Creator are of the opinion that Bekotsidi is the god of the Americans, Essanatohi. But it is generally acknowledged by the Navajos that their most revered deity is Essanatohi, the woman who changes or rejuvenates herself. Much is said of her in the legends, but something more is to be obtained by conversation with the shamans. The name Essanatohi is derived by syncopation from Essan, woman, and Nathi, to change or transform. She is so called because, it is supposed, she never remains in one condition, but that she grows to be an old woman, and in the course of time becomes a young girl again, and so passes through an endless course of lives, changing, but never dying. It is probable that she is an apotheosis of nature, or of the changing year. The deity of fruitful nature is properly a female and a beneficent goddess. She is properly, too, as the legends tell us, the wife of the sun, to whom nature owes her fertility. Her home is said to be in the west, probably for the reason that in the Navajo country, which lies mostly on the Pacific slope, the rain comes usually from the west, and from that direction, too, come the thawing breezes in the spring. Yokai Essan. A divinity called Yokai Essan, or White Shell Woman, created, or found as some versions say, at the same time as Essanatohi, is called the younger sister of the latter. The two goddesses are associated in the myths, but White Shell Woman always acts the subordinate part, and today is honored with a less degree of worship than her sister. Essanatohi, made of an earthly jewel, turquoise, is related to the land. Yokai Szan, made of white shell from the ocean, is related to the waters. War gods. Next in importance to Essanadalhi, the sacred brethren, Nyanisgani, or Najanisgani, and Tabajtsini, one seem to stand. The writer designates these as the war gods, but the Navajos do not call them thus. According to the version of the origin legend here given, one of these was the child of Essanadalhi and the sun, the other the child of Yokai Szan and the water, and this is the version most consistent in all respects. Other versions make both the brothers children of Essanadalhi. Some say they were born twins. Accepting any of these versions, they would properly be called brothers according to the Indian system of relationship, and such they are called in the legends. Their chief mission was to destroy the alien gods, but they still help the warriors in battle and aid the sick who suffer from witchcraft. The longest chapter in the origin legend is devoted to recounting their genesis and history. In reading the chapter, it will be apparent to the comparative mythologists that these characters have their counterparts, which need not now be mentioned, in the myths of many races in both hemispheres. From their mythic associations it would appear that Nyanisgani is a god of light, with its associated heat, while Tabajtsini is a god of darkness, with its associated moisture. Yet, apparently in contradiction to this, the representative of the former is painted black, and wears a black mask in the ceremonies, Plate 4, while the representative of the latter is painted red and wears a red mask, Plate 7. Nyanisgani, whose name signifies slayer of the alien gods, one is spoken of as the elder brother in the legends, and always plays the more important part. Tabajtsini, or child of the water, one is called the younger brother and always appears as a subordinate character. In the ceremonies, the masquerader who personates Nyanisgani always walks in front, while he who personates Tabajtsini comes behind. The two gods are always associated in prayer and sacrifice, but here again, Nyanisgani takes precedence. In all the sacred songs where they are mentioned, the superiority of Nyanisgani is indicated. Antithesis, as has been said, is a favorite figure with the Navajo poets, and they often employ it when speaking of these gods. The song of the approach of the war gods in the ceremony of Tlzi will serve, as well as many other compositions, to show how they treat this subject. It may be freely translated thus: he advances, now slayer of the alien gods advances. Above, among the mountain peaks, he advances. In danger he advances, now child of the water advances. Below, among the foothills he advances. In danger he advances. Thus both the gods come to the aid of the supplicant, but while the elder strides proudly on the summits of the mountains, the younger walks humbly among the foothills. Yea, there are a number of divinities in the Navajo pantheon known as Yea, in compound words often pronounced Yi or Ge, which is translated God or genius. What distinction exists between the Yea and other gods is not easy to determine definitely. The Zunians have a class of gods called by the same name, or, more correctly, Yi, as Mr. Cushing pronounces it. Certain chiefs or important personages among these gods are called by names which begin with the syllables Hace as Haciauti, talking god, Hace Hogan, house god. It is believed that this, if spelled etymologically, would appear as Hastai, but it is not so pronounced. Hast is a prefix denoting age, especially venerable age. We have it in the word Hastin, which means a worthy or respected old man. Hastai would mean a venerable Yea or god. The Yea seem to be deities of minor importance to those previously mentioned and to be more numerous. Thus, while there is but one Essanadalhi, but one Nyanisgani, and but one Tabajtsini, there are several Hace Hogan and several Haciauti, who are chiefs of the Yea. The Yea are supposed to abide in certain localities, and in prayers in their honor the home is mentioned of the Yea to whom appeal is specially made. A place called Natsi, or Red Horizontal Rock, somewhere north of the San Juan River, Sigihi, another place north of the San Juan, and the White House figured 22 in the Chili Canyon, are important homes of the Yea-2. Each of the sacred mountains has its group of Yea. In the myths of Tlzi more than a score of places are named where Yea dwell. There are some reasons for believing that the cult of the Ye is derived from the cliff dwellers or from the Pueblos, but there are arguments too against this theory. The subject will not be further considered here. The Ye are supposed to be married and have families. The males are called Yubaka, the females, Yeba.tu Hesizini, to the god of fire, and Hesiutor, to the divine huntress or goddess of the chase, belong, as their names indicate, to the Ye, while Ganiskidi, to the harvest god, and to Nanili water sprinkler, are associated with them in the legends. Digini. Digin means sacred, divine, mysterious, or holy. It is not quite synonymous with the Dakota Wakan or the Hidatsa Hopa. It is not applied to the treatment of disease. It is not applied in a general way to religious ceremonial. It has not been heard applied to the Anai or other things of evil. For this reason it is often translated, holy. Digini, derived from Digin, means holy people, gods, divinities. It is a name applied to the highest and lowest divinities, including the Ye. See notes in 93. Alien gods. Such are the gods that are friendly to the human race, but man has his enemies too, among the mysterious powers. Chief among the latter are the Anai, 7 the alien gods or inimical genii. These, being analogous to the giants and ogres of European folklore, are sometimes called giants in this work. They are usually represented as creatures of great size. Many of them are described in the origin legend. The worst have been slain, as the story relates, but others, being not unmixed evils, still remain to torment man. The legend, in accounting for their continued existence, shows the philosophic endeavor of our race to reconcile itself to the unwelcome inevitable. Water God. The position of Taihotsodi, 8 the water monster, is one of transferred allegiance. He was once the enemy of our race, but now has become friendly to it in certain ways, though it is probable that he is still thought to be responsible for cases of drowning. Other gods, who were once inimical to man but are now his friends, are mentioned in the legends. But we are not without evidence that the Navajo fears to offend his most beneficent gods, lest the latter may directly punish him, or at least withhold their succor in his hour of need. Devils. Besides the alien gods, there are evil spirits haunting the earth which men dread. These are the Tsindi, whose name cannot be better translated than by calling them devils. The Navajos frequently speak of the Tsindi, Englished Chindi, and they often use the term as an angry exclamation, just as the profane among ourselves say, "Oh, the devil," or "You devil." See Pars, yet they dislike to discuss its character or appearance. They believe there is a devil associated with every corpse, and that it has something of the appearance of a partly decayed corpse. The spirit of the dead man goes to the lower world, which was the former home of the race, yet a demon remains with the dead body. Other Indians believe in a similar corpse spirit, yet the author has never known any who have such dread as the Navajos of human mortuary remains. See Par 1 and Note 91. Zoolatry. The legend tells us that there is a first man and a first woman, see Pars, who came into being in the fourth world as the result of a special act of creation, but they have not died like Adam and Eve. They still live in some form. They are potent, they are immortal, they are divine. But it is not man only that has his divine ancestral prototype. Every animal on the face of the earth has its also, and many, if not all of these are objects of worship. A share of reverence, too, in some cases, as in that of the bear, is bestowed on their mortal descendants. In the rite of the mountain Chantimony, of the sacrifices are sacred to the animals of the mountains. In short, zoolatry is an important element in Navajo worship. Local gods. Some of the gods mentioned are also local divinities, thus the war gods are local divinities at Teitli, and the Ye are local divinities at Sinatsi. But, in addition to these, there are other gods of places so numerous that a complete list of them will probably never be obtained. In the origin legend, it is shown that each of the sacred mountains of the Navajo land, 7 in number according to Tall Chanter, has its divine pair of indwelling guardians, and these seem to receive more honor than any others which are gods of places only. But the genii of other mountains and of different rocks and canyons have their prayers and sacrifices in some of the rites. Fanciful legends of places are common in all lands and among all races, but no people are more ingenious in composing such tales than our American Indians. The Navajo has unusual sources of inspiration in this direction, and he fails not to profit by them. His land abounds in wonderful geologic formations, in rocks strangely sculptured by rain and by nature's sandblast, in vast volcanic peaks and fields of lava, and it abounds also, as might be expected, in myths accounting for these features, and in the genii which belong to the myths. A few of these myths are incorporated in the tales told in this work, but they are very few compared with the total of such legendary lore. The strength of their belief in these local divinities may be illustrated by the following incident. The writer once made a journey, accompanied by 2 Navajos, to Tsuskai 9, Chuska Knoll, which is supposed to be the home of the Tsikesaw Snatalhi, or maidens who become bears. When the party got to the top of the ridge from which the knoll rises, and about 300 yards from the base of the knoll, the Indians refused to go farther, saying they feared the divine ones who dwelt in the knoll. The rider proceeded alone, and had much difficulty in riding up the pathless hill, among loose rocks and fallen trees. On the summit he found a little hollow among the rocks full of sand, and scraping into this, he discovered a number of hand-wrought stone and shell beads, which had been put there as sacrifices. When he descended from the knoll, he found the Indians awaiting him where he had left them, and all set out together to retrace the rough mountain trail down to Red Lake. In a little while, his horse becoming very lame, the rider was obliged to dismount. "What has made your horse lame?" asked the Indians. "He must have struck his leg against some of the fallen trees when he was climbing the knoll," was the answer. "Think not thus, foolish American," they said. "It was not the fallen trees that wounded your horse. The Digini of the mountain have stricken him because you went where you had no right to go. You are lucky if nothing worse happens to you." Of course, Indians had been up to the top of the knoll, or the beads could not have been put there, but they went only after preparatory prayer and only to deposit sacrifices. Demonolatry. There are writers who say that the Indians worship the devil and other malevolent powers, but it is not only learned authors who speak thus. Jesus Alviso, a Mexican captive reared among the Navajos, said to the author in Zero, "Los indios hacen figuras de todos sus diablos, señor." The Indians make figures of all their devils, sir. And it was this hint which led to the discovery of their dry paintings. He called them devils. In this work, they are called gods. Perhaps other tribes worship personifications of evil, but certainly the Navajos do not. The gods who are supposed to love and help men the most receive the greatest honor. The evil spirits are not worshipped except, rumor says, by the witches. It would appear, moreover, from the origin legend, that the worst of evil powers, the alien gods, were long ago destroyed, and that only demons of minor influence remain. The chief of witches, Szan Natan, or woman chief, has her home beneath the earth, in one of the lower worlds. Ceremonies. A great number of ceremonies are practiced by the Navajo priests. Many of these are of 9 days' duration. There are others that last but a single day or a few hours. To learn one of the great rites so as to become its Hatali, chanter, singer, or priest, is the work of many years, and no one knows more than one such rite perfectly. The older priests know something of other rites, may assist at them and sing songs at them, but are not competent to conduct them. A priest of a great rite may know some of the lesser rites. All the great ceremonies which the writer has witnessed among the Navajos are primarily for the healing of the sick, but the occasion is always used to ask the gods for various temporal blessings, not only for the sick person but for all, the shaman, the relations of the sick, and for the people in general. The invalid, for whose benefit the rite is performed, defrays all the expenses of the ceremony, which often amount in value to the sum of $200 or $300. The Navajos being a scattered and to some extent a wandering people who do not build towns, they lack the organization to have rites of a more public character, such as the village Indians have got. Hence these healing ceremonies, in which the sick man and his relations become hosts, are used as occasions for prayer for the common weal, and as occasions in which large numbers may assemble to witness interesting exhibitions and have the social enjoyments which attend the gathering of a crowd. Minor ceremonies. Among the minor ceremonies, besides those for healing the sick, are those of planting, harvesting, building, war, nubility, marriage, travel, and many other occasions in life. In addition to these, there are ceremonies for special occasions, as for bringing rain. During an unusually dry season, a number of Navajos may subscribe together and raise a good fee for a priest to sing, pray, sacrifice, and conduct a ceremony to bring rain. Origin of ceremonies. The late Mr. A. M. Stephen of Arizona, who for many years studied the rites and myths of both Moquis and Navajos, has often called the attention of the writer to the many resemblances between the cults of these two tribes, who differ so much in other respects, and he has suggested that the Navajos may have borrowed from the Moquis. This may be the case, for the Navajos have, probably, people of Moqui descent among them, and they have had intercourse with the Moquis, both peaceful and warlike, for a long time. But, throughout all the Navajo legends so far collected, it is strongly indicated that the Navajo cultus, where borrowed, came from cliff dwellers, from inhabitants of pueblos now deserted, and from wild tribes. The Moquis figure but little in the Navajo rite myths. The author is inclined to believe that the Navajos have not borrowed much directly from the Moquis, but that both tribes have taken inspiration from common sources. In radical points of symbolism, such as the sacred colors in the ceremonial circuit, the Navajo and Moqui rites differ widely. Elements of ceremonies. In the ceremonies there are numerous minor acts of such diverse character that they cannot be classified and are not described in this work. They can be discussed better in connection with the rites to which they belong. There are other acts of minor importance, such as the ceremonial bat hand, the administration of pollen, which are considered in the notes. But there are 6 elements of the worship which constitute such important parts in all the great rites that brief descriptions of them are presented in this introduction. These 6 are sacrifice, painting, masquerade, dance, prayer, and song. The last has been already discussed, par et sec. Sacrifices. The sacrifices of the Navajos are innocent and bloodless. Their kindly gods are easily propitiated. Like their worshippers, they are all fond of tobacco, and they prize a few feathers and beads. Even the chief war god demands no smoking hearts or blood of captives. A little painted cigarette is all he asks in return for his favors. An extensive chapter might be written about the sacrificial cigarettes and sticks which the Navajos call katan, Englished kethon, but a short description of them must suffice here. See Note 12. Cigarettes. The cigarettes are usually made of the hollow joints of the common reed, Phragmites communis, but other plants are sometimes used. To form a cigarette, a piece of the reed is cut off with a stone knife, the node being excluded. It is rubbed with sandstone so that the paint may adhere. It is painted with some symbolical device. A wad of feathers is inserted into it to keep the tobacco from falling out. It is filled with some kind of native tobacco, usually the Nicotiana attenuata, or desalonato of the Navajos. It is sealed with moistened pollen and symbolically lighted with a rock crystal, which is held up to the sky and touched to the tip of the cigarette. After it has been prayed over, it is taken out and left for, i.e., sacrificed to, the god for whom it is intended. The god, they say, recognizes it by its symbolic painting and by the place where it is sacrificed. He picks it up, smells, and examines it. If he is satisfied that it is properly made and that it is for him, he takes it and bestows on the supplicant the favors asked. Sacrificial sticks. Besides the cigarettes, small sticks are used as sacrifices to the gods. These are made from a variety of woods, different gods in different occasions requiring woods of different sorts, and they are painted in a variety of ways for the same reasons. They are usually made in pairs, one for the male and the other for the female. Celibacy is not practiced by the Navajo gods. Every deity has its mate, and she must be propitiated as well as he. The female is distinguished in some way from the male, and this is usually done by cutting a small facet at the tip end of the female stick, see figure 23, to represent the square mask worn by one who masquerades as a goddess in the ceremonies. He who appears as a god wears a round cap-like mask, figure 27, and the round cut end of the stick sufficiently represents this. Often the feathers of different kinds of birds are sacrificed with the kethons, either attached to the latter or separate. Also beads of stone or shell and various kinds of powdered vegetable and mineral substances, including pollen, which is the most sacred substance employed by the Navajo priests. Disposal of chthons. The different ways in which chthons are deposited or sacrificed are as numerous as are their forms, materials, and decorations, and each way has its special symbolism. Some are laid in the branches of a tree, others among rocks, others at the base of a cliff, others again at the root of a tree, and others on level ground. A few are thrown away almost at random, but most of them are laid down with care and with rigorous ceremonial form. All that are laid with care are placed with their tips away from the lodge, and each is destined to go towards some particular point of the compass. When the bearer of the sacrifice leaves the lodge, he proceeds in the direction of the place selected for the sacrifice. When he has deposited it, he turns to the right and takes a sunwise direction in returning. He does not cross his outgoing trail. He must not walk through an anthill. He must run both going and coming well. Ceremonial pictures. The pictures accompanying the Navajo rites are among the most transitory in the history of art. In previous essays, the author has called them dry paintings. Similar works have been observed among other tribes, both nomadic and sedentary, and the observers have designated them as sand paintings, sand altars, etc. They are drawn in all the great rites and even in some of the lesser rites, those of only 1 day's duration. Small but handsome dry paintings are sometimes made. They vary in size from 4 to 12 feet in diameter. Sometimes the fire in the center of the medicine lodge must be removed in order to accommodate them. The groundwork is sand, which is conveyed in blankets into the medicine lodge and spread out over the floor to the depth of about 3 inches. It is smoothed with the broad oaken battens used in weaving. Before the sand is brought in, the pigments are ground to powder and put on broad pieces of pine bark, which serve as trays, or pallets, shall we say. The pigments are 5 in number: white, red, yellow, black, and gray. The white, red, and yellow are made of sandstone. The black is made of powdered charcoal, with which a little sandstone is mixed to facilitate the grinding and give weight to the powder. The gray, made of black and white mixed in suitable proportions, is intended to represent blue, is called blue by the Navajos, and, combined with the other colors, has the effect of blue in the paintings. It will be spoken of as blue in the subsequent descriptions. The Navajos use indigo and a native bluish mineral pigment to paint masks, chthons, and other small objects, but for the dry paintings such a large quantity is needed that these would be too expensive. To apply the colored powder, a pinch of it is taken up between the thumb and first 2 fingers and allowed to fall slowly on the sand, while the thumb is moved over the fingers. To paint one of these large pictures may require the labor of several men, a dozen sometimes, working from early morning till late in the afternoon. The picture must be finished before dark, for it is impracticable to work on it with such artificial lights as the Indians can command. While the work is in progress, the priest who conducts the ceremonies does little more than direct and criticize. The operators have received a certain initiation. They have seen the picture painted before and are familiar with its details. If an error is made, the faulty part is not erased. Sand is spread on it to obliterate it, and the corrected drawing is made on the new deposit of sand. The pictures are drawn according to exact and established rules. Some parts are measured by palms and spans, and not a line of the sacred designs may be varied in them. In drawing straight lines, the colored powder is poured over a tightened cord. But in a few cases the artist is allowed to indulge his fancy. Thus, in drawing the embroidered pouches which the gods wear suspended at the waist, Plate I, the limner may, within certain limits, give his god as handsome a pouch as he wishes and embroider it to suit his notion. The naked forms of the mythical characters are drawn first, and then the clothing and ornaments are laid on. When the picture is finished, a number of ceremonies, differing somewhat in different rites, are performed over it. Pollen or cornmeal may be placed on certain parts of the sacred figures, and one of these substances may be scattered over it. Water or medicinal infusions may be applied to it. At length the patient is brought in and placed sitting on the picture. Moistening his palms, the shaman or an assistant takes the colored dust from various parts of the divine figures and applies it to similar parts of the subject's body. Medicine is then usually administered in 4 drafts. When the patient leaves, others in the lodge who are ill, or fancy themselves ill, take dust on their palms from the picture and apply it to their own persons. He who has headache takes dust from the head in the picture and applies it to his own head. He who has sore feet takes dust from the pictured feet. When all are done, the picture is badly marred. It is then totally obliterated, the method and ceremony of obliteration differing in different rites, and the sand on which it was drawn is taken out of the lodge and thrown away. The floor on the lodge is swept, and the uninitiated, entering a moment later, has no evidence of what has taken place. Plate I shows pictures of 5 different gods as they appear separately in the dry paintings. Figure represents, in black, a complete painting, the original of which was done in 5 different colors, from the right of the Klzi Hadel, or the night chant. It will be observed that some of the gods, or Ye of Plate I, are to be seen in Figure 29. The medicine men declare that these pictures have been transmitted from teacher to pupil, unchanged in all the years since they were revealed to the prophets of the rites. There are good reasons for believing that this is not strictly true. The majority of the great ceremonies may be performed only during the coldest part of the year, the months when the snakes are dormant. No permanent copies of the pictures were ever preserved until the author painted them. They were carried from season to season in the memories of men, and there was no final authority in the tribe to settle questions of correctness. But it is probable that changes, if they occurred, were unintentional and wrought slowly. After the writer made copies of these pictures, and it became known to the medicine men that he had copies in his possession, it was not uncommon for the shamans, pending the performance of a ceremony, to bring young men who were to assist in the lodge, ask to see the paintings, and lecture on them to their pupils, pointing out the various important points, and thus, no doubt, saving mistakes and corrections in the medicine lodge. The watercolor copies were always, as the shamans knew, kept hidden at the forbidden season, and never shown to the uninitiated of the tribe. Masquerade. In the rites, men appear representing gods or other mythic characters. Sometimes such representations are effected by means of paint and equipment only, as in the case of the Akananili, or messenger of the mountain chant, 3, who is dressed to represent the prophet Diesalai Naani, as he appeared after the butterfly goddess had transformed him. But on other occasions masks are added to the dress, as in the rites of the night chant. In this there are 21 masks, 2 made of sacred buckskin, for representatives of the gods to wear, besides a mask of yucca leaves trimmed with spruce twigs, Figure 26, which the patient wears on one occasion. The buckskin masks, without plumes or collars, are kept in a sack by the shaman, and he carries them on horseback to the place where the rites are to be performed. There they are freshly painted, and the collars and plumes are added just before they are to be used in the ceremony. Plates 4 and 7 show the masks as they are actually worn and exhibit men as they are dressed and painted to represent the war gods. In Plate I, we get representations of these masks as they are depicted in the dry paintings. The figure shows the mask of Hesioti, the talking god, as it appears when all is ready for the dance, with plume and collar of fresh spruce twigs applied. The figure depicts the mask of a Yebad, or female Ye. The female masks cover only the face, leaving the hair free. The male masks, Figure 27, cover the entire head, concealing the hair. When a man is dressed in his godly costume, he does not speak. He only makes motions and utters a peculiar cry. Each god has his own special cry, and he may perform acts on the patient with his special weapon or talisman. The masquerader, they say, is, for the time being, no longer a Navajo, but a god, and a prayer to him is a prayer to a god. When he enters the lodge and sits down before the sick man, the latter hands him his sacrifice and prays to him devoutly, well knowing that it may be his own uncle or cousin, disguised in the panoply of divinity, who receives the sacrifice. Dance. It has been customary with travelers to speak of Indian ceremonials as dances. This is chiefly for the reason that the dance most attracts the attention of white men, and the other portions of the work are likely to pass unheeded. Dancing is rarely the most important element of an Indian ceremonial, and among the Navajos it is always a minor element. In some of the lesser rites it does not occur at all. In the 9-day ceremony of the mountain chant, it occurs only on the last night, and then forms but a part of the show. Rude dramatic performances and feats of legerdemain, see Figure 30, occupying about an equal time until the entertainment ends, soon after dawn. In the 9 days ceremony of the night chant, dancing as a part of the ceremony is confined to the last night, although undress rehearsals of the dance take place after sunset for a few days before. These dances of the Navajo, although accompanied with religious symbolism and performed often by men wearing sacred costumes, are undoubtedly intended largely to entertain the spectators. While but a few people may be present during the first 8 or 9 days of a great ceremony, a large crowd always gathers to witness the performances of the last night, and many people stay up all night to do this. On the last night of the mountain chant, the dances are picturesque and various. Many of them are borrowed from other rites. They have been described by the author in a previous work. On the last night of the night chant, the dance and song vary but little, and to the ordinary observer may seem not to vary at all. Yet the spectators who come to the mountain chant are not more wakeful and watchful than those who come to the night chant. The dancing is always rhythmical and well-timed. Figures are often introduced like those of our quadrilles, but no round dances like our waltz or polka have been observed. The rough ground is not suited for such. The dancers and the drummers practice long in private before coming to the public exhibition. Prayer. In a paper entitled The Prayer of a Navajo Shaman, the author has published a long composition called A Prayer by the Man from Whom He Received It, which is a simple narrative and does not contain a word of supplication. This is the only prayer of such character obtained from a Navajo. Many other long prayers have been recorded, all of which are formed on a common plan. The name of a god is mentioned, and some flattering attributes are given to him. If it is a god such as Hasiauti, of which there are more than one of the same name, his residence is mentioned. He is informed that sacrifices have been prepared for him. He is asked to remove the spell of disease. Immediately he is assured that it is removed. Then he is asked to bestow various blessings on the supplicant and all his kindred and people. The prayer is given out, one sentence at a time, by the shaman, and the patient repeats it after him, sentence by sentence. These prayers, repeated by 2 voices, sound much like litanies, and all end with an expression, Hazona Hassel, analogous to the Amen of Christian prayers, 4 times repeated. Yet the Navajo prayers show in their spirit no indication of the influence of Christian teaching. They are purely pagan compositions. The only evidence of any modern influence they present is the occasional inclusion of a request for increase of wealth in the shape of horses and sheep. A typical Navajo prayer from the rites of Klzi Hadel is given in note. Besides these long prayers, repeated by 2 persons, the shamans have many monologue prayers. There are prayers silent and vocal, formulated and extempore, used by both priest and layman, and there are short devotional sayings which may be classed as benedictions and ejaculations. The legends. Of the many lengthy myths and legends obtained by the author from the Navajos, 3 have been selected for publication in this volume. The first is the origin legend of the tribe. The other 2 are incomplete rite myths, i.e., rite myths told by men who were not priests of the associated rites. Versions. As might be expected among an unlettered people, thinly scattered over a wide territory, the legends of the Navajos have many variants. No 2 men will tell the same tale exactly alike, and each storyteller will probably maintain that his own version is the only reliable one. Variations of the origin legend, which is the property of the tribe at large, and unlike the rite myths, is not in the keeping of any especial order or priesthood, are particularly numerous, but even in the rite myths, as told by priests of the rites, versions may be found. Notwithstanding these varieties, the tale-tellers agree substantially in the more important matters. Of the 2 rite myths given in this work, only one version of each was procured, but several versions of the origin legend, complete or partial, were recorded. The one here published was selected as being the most complete, extensive, and consistent of all. Other versions often supplement it. The narrators sometimes acknowledged that they had forgotten episodes which others had remembered and detailed. The learned old shaman, Hadley and Ez, forgot to tell how the stars were made, while a younger and less erudite person, Jake the silversmith, related a fair version of this episode, which came also from other sources to the writer. Jake's version of the legend, which has already been published, is designated in the notes as version B. 3, that of Old Torlino, a priest of the Hazoni Hadal, is designated as version A. Other versions are alluded to, but not designated by letter or number. Some fragmentary versions by other authors 23 have been published, but these are not quoted in the notes. Origin Legend. The origin legend divides itself into 4 very distinct parts or chapters, which are named I. The story of the emergence. 2. Early events in the Fifth World. 3. The war gods. 4. The growth of the Navajo nation. The name of the first part is that given to it by the Navajo storytellers. The names of the other parts are supplied by the author. The first part, the story of the emergence, ends when it is related that the people came out from the fourth world to the surface of this, the fifth world. 15. Rite myths. By a rite myth is meant a myth which accounts for the work of a ceremony, for its origin, for its introduction among the Navajos, or for all these things combined. The Navajos celebrate long and costly ceremonies, many of which are of 9 days' duration. Each ceremony has connected with it one or more myths or legends which may not be altogether mythical. When a rite myth is told by a priest of the rite to which the myth belongs, minute and often tedious particulars concerning the rite, its work, symbolism, and sacrifices are introduced into the tale. When such a myth is told by one who is not a priest of the rite, although he may be a priest of some other rite, these esoteric parts are altogether omitted or only briefly alluded to. To the latter class belong the 2 rite myths given in this book. They are here published because they are among the most interesting and ingenious that have been collected among the Navajos. The attention of the reader is directed, in the notes, to a few places where esoteric or ceremonial matters are thought to be referred to. Tales containing ceremonial allusions in full are reserved for future publication, along with a description of the rites to which they pertain, as such is considered the more appropriate place for their publication. In one version of the origin legend, version A, a portion of this story is used as a rite myth. It is embellished with prayers and songs, and interspersed with allusions to ceremonial work which the version of Hadley and Easy does not contain, but in other respects it is inferior to the latter. Thus embellished, it contributes a share to the myth of the ceremony of Hazoni Hadal, or chant of terrestrial beauty. Even in the version of Hadley and Easy, the songs seem introduced from some rite myth, and scarcely to belong to the original story. Whenever an opportunity has occurred of studying a rite with its associated myth, it has been found that the myth never explains all the symbolism of the rite, although it may account for all the more important acts. A primitive and underlying symbolism, which probably existed previous to the establishment of the rite, remains unexplained by the myth, as though its existence were taken as a matter of course and required no explanation. Some explanation of this foundation symbolism may be found in the origin legend, or in other early legends of the tribe, but something remains which even these do not explain. Myths of the whirling logs. In the ceremony of Kludzi Hadal, there is drawn upon the floor of the medicine lodge a large dry painting, which is very imperfectly represented in figure 29. The original was wrought in 5 colors and was about feet in diameter. It depicts a vision of the prophet Belahatini, who established the rites of Kludzi Hadal. On one occasion, says the tale, he was led, in the San Juan Valley, to a lake on the borders of which grew 4 stalks of sacred corn, each of a different color. In the center of the lake lay 2 logs crossing one another at right angles. Near both ends of each log sat a pair of yei, or genii, male and female, making 8 in all. On the shore of the lake stood 4 more yei, 3 of whom had staves, by means of which they kept the crossed logs away from the shore and whirling in the waters. The rainbow goddess, the anthropomorphic rainbow of the Navajos, surrounded the lake. All the circumstances of this strange scene are duly symbolized in the painting. It was in his efforts to get a further explanation of this extraordinary picture that the author came upon the story of Nadi Nesthani. It is not the story that explains the picture, although certain passages in it might seem to explain it. The story to which the picture belongs is that of Belahatini, which may someday be published in connection with the description of the ceremony of Kludzi Hadal, or the night chant. The prophet Belahatini, according to the tale, floated down the San Juan River in a hollow log until he came to the whirling lake, where he saw the vision depicted in the dry painting. But when the shaman had finished telling the story of Belahatini, he said, "There is another story of a man who floated down the San Juan River in a hollow log. It is a story belonging to a different rite, the Atsosits Hadal. Would you like to hear it?" It was thus that the story of Nadi Nesthani came to be told. The narrator of the two tales was a priest of the Kludzi Hadal, but not of the Atsosits Hadal. Hence one tale is crowded with allusions to acts in the ceremony, while the other, as here published, has few such allusions. The Great Shell of Kintile. The story of the Great Shell of Kintile, as here given, is a fragment of a rite myth, the myth of the Yai Hadal, or Yai Hadal II, bead chant, a 9 days healing ceremony. It conveys a moral often found in Navajo tales, which is, that we must not despise the poor and humble. They may be favored by the gods and prove themselves tomorrow more potent than those who yesterday despised and mocked them. It also signalizes the triumph of a poor Navajo over wealthy pueblos. Translation of legends. In rendering the Navajo tales into English, the author has not confined himself to a close literal translation. Such translation would often be difficult to understand, and, more often still, be uninteresting reading. He has believed it to be his duty to make a readable translation, giving the spirit of the original rather than the exact words. The tales were told in fluent Navajo, easy of comprehension, and of such literary perfection as to hold the hearer's attention. They should be translated into English of a similar character, even if words have to be added to make the sense clear. Such privileges are taken by the translators of the Bible and of the classic authors. Still, the writer has taken pains never to exceed the metaphor or descriptive force of the original, and never to add a single thought of his own. If he has erred in rendering the spirit of the savage authors, it has been by diminishing rather than by exaggerating. He has erred on the side of safety. He has endeavored to tune the sitar rather low than high at 15A. Again, the original was often embellished with pantomime and vocal modulation which expressed more than the mere words, and which the writer is unable to represent, and it contained extemporized onomatops which no letters can express. Texts. The men who narrated to the author the tales contained in this book were not men of unlimited leisure, as many supposed the Indians to be. They were popular shamans, or medicine men, who had numerous engagements to conduct ceremonies during the summer months, and it was only during the winter months that they permitted themselves to tell the tales. It was usually with difficulty that arrangements were made with one of these shamans to devote a period of 2 or 3 weeks to the service of the author. Then, too, they had farms in stock which demanded their care. Neither was the author a man of unbounded leisure. Rarely could he devote more than 2 or 3 hours out of 24 to the work of ethnography. It has happened more than once that he has been obliged to break an engagement made with a shaman, at a cost of considerable trouble and money, in order to go on detached service away from his proper station. For these reasons, it was not practicable to record the original Indian texts of all the stories. The author had to choose between copious texts and copious tales. He chose the latter, but some texts have been recorded. In order that the reader may judge how closely the liberal translation here offered follows the original, the Navajo text of the opening passages, 10 paragraphs, of the origin legend, with interlinear translations, are given in the notes. The texts of songs, prayers, and interesting passages may also be found in the notes. Alphabet used. Ever since the present alphabet of the Bureau of Ethnology was established, in 0, it has been the author's custom to use it in spelling Indian words. But heretofore he has written mostly for the scientific world, for ethnologists and philologists who either were familiar with the alphabet or were willing to constantly refer to it in reading. As the present work is designed to reach a wider circle of readers, the propriety of using the alphabet of the Bureau becomes doubtful. Many of the author's friends have begged him not to use it in this collection of tales, believing that its unusual characters would embarrass the average reader and detract from the interest of the work. Another system has, therefore, been devised, according to which consonants printed in Roman letters have the ordinary English sounds, while those printed in italics have sounds analogous to the English but not identical with them. The vowels, when unmarked, have the continental sounds. When these sounds are modified, diacritical marks are added in accordance with the latest edition of Webster's Dictionary. The sound of English A, in what is indicated by A, The only diphthong is I, which has the sound of English I in pine. One mark not employed in Webster's orthoepy is used in this book, viz., the inverted comma after a vowel to show that it is aspirated. According to this arrangement, the casual reader will find the Indian words easily legible. If he takes the trouble to consult this and the preceding paragraph, he may pronounce the words almost exactly as a Navajo would. If not, he may, at least, pronounce them in a way that few Navajos would fail to comprehend. At all events, to the majority of readers, a perfect pronunciation of the Indian words is immaterial. Many white men, living within the borders of the Navajo land, converse with these Indians in a jargon or debased language which might be spelled in English characters with their ordinary English values. For example, let us take the word for hut or house. This is properly pronounced Hogan, but the whites in New Mexico generally call it Hogan, and the Navajos never fail to understand the word as thus pronounced. In this form, it is an adopted English word in the Southwest. The following are the values of the consonants when printed in italics. D has the sound of English th in this. G has a sound unknown in English. G imperfectly represents it. It is the G of the Dakota, or the Arabic gun. H has the sound of German Tilmächen. L is an aspirated L unknown in English. HL imperfectly represents it. It is formed with the side rather than with the tip of the tongue. S has the sound of English SH in shot. T has the sound of English TH in thing. Z has the sound of English Z in azure. C, J, Q, R, and X are not used. The sound of English CH in church is represented by TS, that of English J in jug by DZ spelling of Navajo. In the many papers about the Navajos which the author has previously written, he has spelled the name of the tribe according to the Spanish system, Navajo, with the plural also in Spanish form, Navajos. In the present work he spells it, according to English orthography, Navajo, with an English plural, Navajos, and he thus intends to spell it in the future. This he does because the Spanish spelling is misleading to the majority of English readers. It may properly be asked why he should adopt an English orthography for Navajo, a name of Spanish origin, while he retains the misleading Spanish orthography of San Juan. It is not sufficient, in reply, to say that the territory of the Navajo has been in the possession of the United States since 8, and that we have thus acquired the right to spell this name in our own way, for 1,000 other names of Spanish origin have marked our map as long, which we never ventured to change, either in spelling or pronunciation. Perhaps the best defense to be made of our course is that the name Navajo exists nowhere but within our borders. If we change the spelling here, we do not conflict with the spelling elsewhere. But there are scores of San Juans in Spanish America. We could not change the spelling of our San Juan without confusion. It were better that we should follow the example of Lord Byron and pronounce it Juan, but this the people of the Southwest will probably never do. They will speak of the stream as the San Juan or the San Whon for all time. Furthermore, the English spelling of Navajo is not a new thing with the writer. Many have already adopted it. Notes. In preparing the notes, the author has usually limited himself to such matters as he believes he only can explain, or such as, at least, he can explain better than anyone else. In a few cases he has given information on subjects not generally known and not easily to be investigated. The temptation to wander into the seductive paths of comparative mythology and to speculate on the more recondite significance of the myths had to be resisted if the work were to be kept within the limits of one volume. Resemblances between the tales of the Navajos and those of other peoples, civilized and savage, ancient and modern, are numerous and marked, but space devoted to them would be lost to more important subjects. Again, many of the readers of this book may be prepared, better than the author, to note these resemblances. Shamans. 16. So much has been said against the medicine men of the Indians by various writers, who accuse them of being reactionaries, mischief makers, and errant deceivers, that the writer feels constrained to give some testimony in their favor, in favor at least, of those he has met among the Navajos. He will not speak now for other tribes. There are, among the Navajos, charlatans and cheats who treat disease, men who pretend to suck disease out of the patient and then draw from their own mouths pebbles, pieces of charcoal, or bodies of insects, claiming that these are the disease which they have extracted. But the priests of the great rites are not to be classed with such. All of these with whom the writer is acquainted are above such trickery. They perform their ceremonies in the firm conviction that they are invoking divine aid, and their calling lends dignity to their character. They interfere little with the political affairs of the tribe. Smiling chanter. It is a source of great regret that a better likeness cannot be presented of Hadley Nat Loy than that shown in Figure 31. It is reproduced from a painting which was copied from a dim Kodak photograph. His name may be translated Smiling Chanter or Smiling Doctor. An angry or unpleasant expression is never seen on his face. He is also called Hadley Pazzoni, which may be translated Happy or Good-Natured Chanter. He is a priest of the Kludzi Hadel, or night chant. He would be considered a man of high character in any community. He is dignified, courteous, kind, honest, truthful, and self-respecting. But his dignity is not of the pompous kind. He has a keen sense of humor, makes an excellent joke, and is a good mimic, but for all his fun, he is neither vulgar nor unkind. He never begged from the author, and never made a bargain with him in advance for his services, or named a price for them when he was done. He always took the greatest pains to explain everything, and after the writer had been duly initiated into the mysteries of his order, he withheld nothing. To him we are indebted for the story of Nadi Nesthani. Tall Chanter. Figure represents an aged priest named Hadley Nez, or Tall Chanter. He was the first who could be persuaded to explain to the author the ceremonies or relate the right myths, but when he set the example, others were found to follow. He also is a priest of the night chant. Of late years he has become unpopular as a shaman, owing to an increasing irritability of temper, but he exhibits no envy of his more popular rivals. He perhaps has a better knowledge of the legends than any other man in the tribe. Before he would confide any of his secrets to the author, he said, "The chanters among the Navajos are all brothers. If you would learn our secrets, you must be one of us. You must forever be a brother to me. Do you promise this?" He has ever since addressed the author as Sitsi Lee, my younger brother, and has in turn been called Sinai, my elder brother. Ethics. Among themselves, these men have a code of ethics which is, in general, more honestly upheld than the code of our own medical profession. They exhibit no jealousy of one another. They boast not of the excellence of the particular rite they practice. They assist and counsel one another. If a medicine man, in performing a rite, finds that his supply of some sacred article is exhausted, he sends to the nearest medicine man for it. If the latter has it, he is obliged to give, and is not allowed to receive payment in return. Torlino. They are as willing as any other Indians to learn the white man's philosophy. Old Torlino, a priest of Hazoni Hadel, sent a son to school at Carlisle, and when the young man returned, he no doubt imparted to his father much that he had learned there. The writer sent for the old man to get from him the myth of Hazoni Hadel. Torlino began, "I know the white men say the world is round, and that it floats in the air. My tale says the world is flat, and that there are 5 worlds, one above another. You will not believe my tale then, and perhaps you do not want to hear it." Being assured that the tale was earnestly desired, despite of all white men's theories, he proceeded, "I shall tell you the truth then. I shall tell you all that I heard from the old men who taught me, as well as I can now remember. Why should I lie to you?" And then he made the interesting asseveration, which is here literally translated, "I am ashamed before the earth. I am ashamed before the heavens. I am ashamed before the dawn. I am ashamed before the evening twilight. I am ashamed before the blue sky. I am ashamed before the darkness. I am ashamed before the sun. I am ashamed before that standing within me which speaks with me, my conscience. Too, some of these things are always looking at me. I am never out of sight. Therefore I must tell the truth. That is why I always tell the truth. I hold my word tight to my breast." Medical practice. Often have the shamans come to the author for treatment for themselves and their friends, and they never made any secret of this, but asked for medicine in the presence of the laity of their own tribe. They do not pretend to deal in panaceas. On the other hand, in cases where the author has failed to give prompt relief to a sick Indian, they have come in all sincerity and politeness and said, "I know a remedy for that difficulty. Will you let me try it?" They do not confine themselves to the practice of their shamanistic rites. They use various plants in the treatment of disease, and these, in simple, acute cases, they administer without prayer, sacrifice, or incantation. A last word to poets and others. It is possible that poets, novelists, travelers, and compilers will search this humble volume and cull from it facts and fancies which, clothed in fair diction, may add interest to their pages. The author does not ask that such writers shall acknowledge the source of their inspiration. This is more than he has a right to expect. Our greatest poets have borrowed from sources as obscure and never named their creditors. The author has often, ere now, experienced the pleasure of seeing his thoughts and discoveries blazoned in print over other names. But he ventures to make a few requests of the literary borrower. He begs that the latter will not garble or distort what is here written, that he will not put alien thoughts into the minds of these pagan heroes, that he will not arm them with the weapons nor clothe them in the habiliments of an alien race, that he will not make them act incongruous parts. Stephen Powers, in his Tribes of California, 3, page 38, gives in simple and direct language the story of how fire came to the Carrick Nation. A few years after he wrote, someone worked his story into a poem, which appeared most artistically illustrated in one of our leading magazines. In this poem, the coyote, in a quandary, is represented as stroking his goatee. Coyotes have no goatees. Indians have no goatees. The act of stroking the goatee, in thought or perplexity, is the special mannerism of a nervous American. No allusion could be more out of place in an Indian legend. Should the poet referred to ever select any of the tales in this book to be tortured into a poem, I beg that he will not, even for the sake of making a faulty rhyme, put a beard on the chin of the Navajo coyote god. Washington Matthews. 12 New Hampshire Avenue, Washington, D.C. May 1st, 6th. Legends. The Navajo Origin Legend. The story of the emergence. At Tbilhaski, in the middle of the First World, white arose in the east, and they regarded it as day there, they say. Blue rose in the south, and still it was day to them, and they moved around. Yellow rose in the west and showed that evening had come. Then dark arose in the north, and they lay down and slept 18. See Plate 2. San Francisco Mountain, Docoslid, Arizona, the sacred mountain of the West. At Tbilhaski, water flowed out from a central source in different directions. One stream flowed to the east, another to the south, and another to the west. There were dwelling places on the border of the stream that flowed to the east, on that which flowed to the south, and on that which flowed to the west also. To the east there was a place called Tan, corn, to the south a place called Na Dula, and to the west a place called Lokatsosakad, standing reed. Again, to the east there was a place called Esalai, one pot, to the south a place called Tahajtul, they come often for water, and to the west a place called Salitsibehogan, house made of the Red Mountain. Then again to the east there was a place called Leahogan, underground house, to the south a place called Tiasauthiasintha, among aromatic sumac, and to the west a place called Tzilizabehogan, house made of red rock. Halitsi Dilyi La, dark ants lived there. Halitsi Litsi, red ants lived there. Tanalai, dragonflies lived there. Salsa, yellow beetles lived there. Warntlizi, hard beetles lived there. Siyoali, stone carrier beetles lived there. Canalizin, black beetles lived there. Mazon, coyote dung beetles lived there. Zapani, bats lived there. Tatso, white-faced beetles lived there. Wanasiti, locusts lived there. Wanasiti Kai, white locusts lived there. These 12 people started in life there. The 19. To the east extended an ocean, to the south an ocean, to the west an ocean, and to the north an ocean. In the ocean to the east lay Taihotsodi. He was chief of the people there. In the ocean to the south lived Thoutlehale, Blue Heron, who was chief of the people there. In the ocean to the west lay Tisau Frog, who was chief of the people there. In the ocean to the north was Idni-Zokai, White Mountain Thunder, and he was chief of the people there. 20. The people quarreled among themselves, and this is the way it happened. They committed adultery, one people with another. Many of the women were guilty. They tried to stop it, but they could not. Taihotsodi, the chief in the east, said, "What shall we do with them? They like not the land they dwell in." In the south, Blue Heron spoke to them, and in the west, Frog said, "No longer shall you dwell here, I say. I am chief here." To the north, White Mountain Lightning said, "Go elsewhere at once, depart from here." When again they sinned and again they quarreled, Taihotsodi in the east would not speak to them. Blue Heron in the south would not speak to them. Frog in the west would say nothing, and White Mountain Thunder in the north would not speak to them. Again, at the end of 4 nights, the same thing happened. Those who dwelt at the south again committed crime, and again they had contentions. One woman and one man sought to enter in the east to complain to the chief, but they were driven out. In the south they sought to go in where Blue Heron lay, but again they were driven out. In the west, where Frog was the chief, again they tried to enter, but again they were driven out. To the north again they were driven out. The chief said, "None of you shall enter here. Go elsewhere and keep on going." That night at Na-Dula they held a council, but they arrived at no decision. At dawn Taihotsodi began to talk. "You pay no attention to my words. Everywhere you disobey me, you must go to some other place. Not upon this earth shall you remain." Thus he spoke to them. Among the women, for 4 nights they talked about it. At the end of the 4th night, in the morning, as they were rising, something white appeared in the east. It appeared also in the south, the west, and the north. It looked like a chain of mountains, without a break, stretching around them. It was water that surrounded them, water impassable, water insurmountable, flowed all around. All at once they started. They went in circles upward till they reached the sky. It was smooth. They looked down, but there the water had risen, and there was nothing else but water there. While they were flying around, one having a blue head thrust out his head from the sky and called to them, saying, "In here, to the eastward, there is a hole." They entered the hole and went through it up to the surface of the second world. The blue one belonged to the Haesosiding, or swallow people, that the swallow people lived there. A great many of their houses, rough and lumpy, lay scattered all around. Each tapered toward the top, and at that part there was a hole for entrance. A great many people approached and gathered around to the strangers, but they said nothing. The first world was red in color. The second world, into which the people had now entered, was blue. They sent out 2 couriers, a locust and a white locust, to the east to explore the land and see if there were in it any people like themselves. At the end of 2 days the couriers returned, and said that in 1 day's travel they had reached the edge of the world, the top of a great cliff that arose from an abyss whose bottom they could not see, but that they found in all their journey no people, no animals of any kind, no trees, no grass, no sagebrush, no mountains, nothing but bare, level ground. The same couriers were then dispatched in turn to the south, to the west, and to the north. They were gone on each journey 2 days, and when they returned related, as before, that they had reached the edge of the world, and discovered nothing but an uninhabited waste. Here, then, the strangers found themselves in the center of a vast barren plain, where there was neither food nor a kindred people. When the couriers had returned from the north, the swallows visited the camp of the newly arrived people, and asked them why they had sent out the couriers to the east. "We sent them out," was the reply, "to see what was in the land, and to see if there were any people like ourselves here." "And what did your couriers tell you?" asked the swallows. "They told us that they came to the edge of the world, yet found no plant and no living thing in all the land." The same questions were asked, and the same answers given for the other points of the compass. "They spoke the truth," said the swallow people. "Had you asked us in the beginning what the land contained, we would have told you and saved you all your trouble." Until you came, no one has ever dwelt in all this land but ourselves. The people then said to the swallows, "You understand our language and are much like us. You have legs, feet, bodies, heads, and wings as we have. Why cannot your people and our people become friends?" "Let it be as you wish," said the swallows, and both parties began at once to treat each other as members of one tribe. They mingled one among the other and addressed one another by the terms of relationship as my brother, my sister, my father, my son, etc. 23. They all lived together pleasantly and happily for 23 days, but on the 24th night one of the strangers made too free with the wife of the swallow chief, and next morning, when the latter found out what had happened, he said to the strangers, "We have treated you as friends, and thus you return our kindness. We doubt not that for such crimes you were driven from the lower world, and now you must leave this. This is our land, and we will have you here no longer. Besides, this is a bad land. People are dying here every day, and, even if we spare you, you cannot live here long." The locusts took the lead on hearing this. They soared upwards, the others followed, and all soared and circled till they reached the sky. When they reached the sky, they found it, like the sky of the first world, smooth and hard with no opening. But while they were circling round under it, they saw a white face peering out at them. It was the face of Nilsi, the wind. He called to them and told them if they would fly to the south, they would find a hole through which they could pass. So off they flew, as bidden, and soon they discovered a slit in the sky which slanted upwards toward the south. Through this slit they flew, and soon entered the third world in the south. The color of the third world was yellow. Here they found nothing but the grasshopper people. The latter gathered around the wanderers in great numbers, but said nothing. They lived in holes in the ground along the banks of a great river, which flowed through their land to the east. The wanderers sent out the same locust messengers that they had sent out in the second world to explore the land to the east, to the south, to the west, to the north, to find out what the land contained, and to see if there were any kindred people in it. But the messengers returned from each journey after an absence of 2 days, saying they had reached the end of the world, and that they had found a barren land with no people in it, save the grasshoppers. 24. When the couriers returned from their fourth journey, the 2 great chiefs of the grasshoppers visited the strangers and asked them why they had sent out the explorers, and the strangers answered that they had sent them out to see what grew in the land, and to find if there were any people like themselves in it. "And what did your couriers find?" said the grasshopper chiefs. "They found nothing save the bare land and the river, and no people but yourselves." "There is nothing else in the land," said the chiefs. "Long we have lived here, but we have seen no other people but ourselves until you came." The strangers then spoke to the grasshoppers, as they had spoken to the swallows in the second world, and begged that they might join them and become one people with them. The grasshoppers consented, and the 2 peoples at once mingled among one another and embraced one another, and called one another by the endearing terms of relationship, as if they were all of the same tribe. As before, all went well for 23 days, but on the 24th, one of the strangers served a chief of the grasshoppers as the chief of the swallows had been served in the lower world. In the morning, when the wrong was discovered, the chief reviled the strangers and bade them depart. "For such crimes," he said, "I suppose you were chased from the world below. You shall drink no more of our water, you shall breathe no more of our air. Begone." Up they all flew again, and circled round and round until they came to the sky above them, and they found it smooth and hard as before. When they had circled round for some time, looking in vain for an entrance, they saw a red head stuck out of the sky, and they heard a voice which told them to fly to the west. It was the head of Red Wind which they saw, and it was his voice that spoke to them. The passage which they found in the west was twisted round like the tendril of a vine. It had thus been made by the wind. They flew up in circles through it, and came out in the fourth world. 4 of the grasshoppers came with them. 1 was white, 1 blue, 1 yellow, and 1 black. We have grasshoppers of these 4 colors with us to this day 25. The surface of the fourth world was mixed black and white. The colors in the sky were the same as in the lower worlds, but they differed in their duration. In the first world, the white, the blue, the yellow, and the black all lasted about an equal length of time every day. In the second world, the blue and the black lasted a little longer than the other two colors. In the third world, they lasted still longer. In the fourth world, there was but little of the white and yellow. The blue and the black lasted most of the time. As yet there was neither sun, moon, nor star. When they arrived on the surface of the fourth world, they saw no living thing, but they observed 4 great snow-covered peaks sticking up at the horizon, one at the east, one at the south, one at the west, and one at the north. They sent 2 couriers to the east. These returned at the end of 2 days. They related that they had not been able to reach the eastern mountain, and that, though they had traveled far, they had seen no track or trail or sign of life. 2 couriers were then sent to the south. When they returned, at the end of 2 days, they related that they had reached a low range of mountains this side of the great peak, that they had seen no living creature, but had seen 2 different kinds of tracks, such as they had never seen before, and they described such as the deer and the turkey make now. 2 couriers were next sent to the west. In 2 days these returned, having failed to reach the great peak in the west, and having seen no living thing and no sign of life. At last 2 couriers were sent to the north. When these got back to their kindred, they said they had found a race of strange men, who cut their hair square in front, who lived in houses in the ground and cultivated fields. These people, who were engaged in gathering their harvest, the couriers said, treated them very kindly and gave them food to eat. It was now evident to the wanderers that the fourth world was larger than any of the worlds below. The day following the return of the couriers who went to the north, 2 of the newly discovered race, Kishani, Pueblos they were called, entered the camp of the exiles and guided the latter to a stream of water. The water was red, and the Kishani told the wanderers they must not walk through the stream, for if they did the water would injure their feet. The Kishani showed them a square raft made of 4 logs, a white pine, a blue spruce, and yellow pine, and a black spruce, on which they might cross, so they went over the stream and visited the homes of the Kishani. The Kishani gave the wanderers corn and pumpkins to eat, and the latter lived for some time on the food given to them daily by their new friends. They held a council among themselves, in which they resolved to mend their manners for the future and do nothing to make the Kishani angry. The land of the Kishani had neither rain nor snow. The crops were raised by irrigation. Late in the autumn they heard in the east the distant sound of a great voice calling. They listened and waited, and soon heard the voice nearer and louder. They listened still, and heard the voice a 3rd time, nearer and louder than before. Once more they listened, and soon they heard the voice louder still, and clear like the voice of one near at hand. A moment later, 4 mysterious beings appeared to them. These were Bitsis Lakai, or White Body, a being like the god of this world whom the Navajos call Hesioti; Bitsis Datlez, or Blue Body, who was like the present Navajo god Tenenili, or Water Sprinkler; Bitsis Litsoy, or Yellow Body; and Bitsis Lizien, or Black Body, who was the same as the present Navajo god of fire, Hesizini. These beings, without speaking, made many signs to the people, as if instructing them, but the latter did not understand them. When the gods had gone, the people long discussed the mysterious visit, and tried to make out what the gods meant by the signs they had made. Thus the gods visited 4 days in succession. On the 4th day, when the other 3 had departed, Black Body remained behind and spoke to the people in their own language. He said, "You do not seem to understand the signs that these gods make you, so I must tell you what they mean. They want to make more people, but in form like themselves. You have bodies like theirs, but you have the teeth, the feet, and the claws of beasts and insects. The new creatures are to have hands and feet like ours, but you are uncleanly, you smell badly. Have yourselves well cleansed when we return. We will come back in 12 days. On the morning of the 12th day, the people washed themselves well. The women dried themselves with yellow cornmeal. the men with white cornmeal. Soon after the ablutions were completed, they heard the distant call of the approaching gods. It was shouted, as before, 4 times, nearer and louder at each repetition, and, after the 4th call, the gods appeared. Blue Body and Black Body each carried a sacred buckskin. White Body carried 2 ears of corn, 1 yellow, 1 white, each covered at the end completely with grains. 28. The gods laid 1 buckskin on the ground with the head to the west. On this they placed the 2 ears of corn, with their tips to the east, and over the corn they spread the other buckskin with its head to the east. Under the white ear they put the feather of a white eagle, under the yellow ear the feather of a yellow eagle. Then they told the people to stand at a distance and allow the wind to enter. The white wind blew from the east, and the yellow wind blew from the west, between the skins. While the wind was blowing, 8 of the Mirage people came and walked around the objects on the ground 4 times, and as they walked, the eagle feathers, whose tips protruded from between the buckskins, were seen to move. When the Mirage people had finished their walk, the upper buckskin was lifted, the ears of corn had disappeared, a man and a woman lay there in their stead. The white ear of corn had been changed into a man, the yellow ear into a woman. It was the wind that gave them life. It is the wind that comes out of our mouths now that gives us life. When this ceases to blow, we die. In the skin at the tips of our fingers we see the trail of the wind. It shows us where the wind blew when our ancestors were created. The pair thus created were first man and first woman, Atsa Haston and Atsa Eszan. The gods directed the people to build an enclosure of brushwood for the pair. When the enclosure was finished, first man and first woman entered it, and the gods said to them, "Live together now as husband and wife." At the end of 4 days, hermaphrodite twins were born, and at the end of 4 days more, a boy and a girl were born, who in 4 days grew to maturity and lived with one another as husband and wife. The primal pair had in all 5 pairs of twins, the first of which only was barren, being hermaphrodites. In 4 days after the last pair of twins was born, the gods came again and took first man and first woman away to the eastern mountain where the gods dwelt, and kept them there for 4 days. When they returned, all their children were taken to the eastern mountain and kept there for 4 days. Soon after they all returned, it was observed that they occasionally wore masks, such as Hasielti and Hashogan wear now, and that when they wore these masks, they prayed for all good things, for abundant rain and abundant crops. It is thought, too, that during their visit to the eastern mountain, they learned the awful secrets of witchcraft, for the Antihi, witches, wizards, always keep such masks with them, and marry those too nearly related to them. When they returned from the eastern mountain, the brothers and sisters separated, and keeping the fact of their former unlawful marriages secret, the brothers married women of the Mirage people, and the sisters married men of the Mirage people. They kept secret, too, all the mysteries they had learned in the eastern mountain. The women thus married bore children every 4 days, and the children grew to maturity in 4 days, were married, and in their turn had children every 4 days. This numerous offspring married among the Kishani, and among those who had come from the lower world, and soon there was a multitude of people in the land. These descendants of first man and first woman made a great farm. They built a dam and dug a wide irrigating ditch. But they feared the Kishani might injure their dam or their crops, so they put one of the hermaphrodites to watch the dam and the other to watch the lower end of the field. The hermaphrodite who watched at the dam invented pottery. He made first a plate, a bowl, and a dipper, which were greatly admired by the people. The hermaphrodite who lived at the lower end of the farm invented the wicker water bottle. Others made, from thin split boards of cottonwood, implements which they shoved before them to clear the weeds out of the land. They made also hoes from shoulder blades of deer and axes of stone. They got their seeds from the Kishani. Once they killed a little deer, and someone among them thought that perhaps they might make, from the skin of the head, a mask, by means of which they could approach other deer and kill them. They tried to make such a mask, but failed. They could not make it fit. They debated over the invention and considered it for 4 days, but did not succeed. On the morning of the 5th day, they heard the gods shouting in the distance. As on a previous occasion, they shouted 4 times, and after the 4th call they made their appearance. They brought with them heads of deer and of antelope. They showed the people how the masks were made and fitted, how the eye holes were cut, how the motions of the deer were to be imitated, and explained to them all the other mysteries of the deer hunt. The next day, hunters went out, and several deer were killed. From these more masks were made, and with these masks more men went out to hunt. After that time the camp had abundance of meat. The people dressed the deerskins and made garments out of them. The people from the 3rd world had been in the 4th world 8 years when the following incident occurred. One day they saw the sky stooping down and the earth rising up to meet it. For a moment they came in contact, and then there sprang out of the earth, at the point of contact, the coyote and the badger. We think now that the coyote and the badger are children of the sky. The coyote rose first, and for this reason we think he is the elder brother of the badger. At once the coyote came over to the camp and skulked round among the people, while the badger went down into the hole that led to the lower world. First Man told the people the names of the 4 mountains which rose in the distance. They were named the same as the 4 mountains that now bound the Navajo land. There was Tsisnajni in the east, Tsozel in the south, Dokazlit in the west, and Deepnza in the north, and he told them that a different race of people lived in each mountain. First Man was the chief of all these people in the 4th world, except the Kishani. He was a great hunter, and his wife, First Woman, was very corpulent. One day he brought home from the hunt a fine fat deer. The woman boiled some of it, and they had a hearty meal. When they were done, the woman wiped her greasy hands on her dress, and made a remark which greatly enraged her husband. They had a quarrel about this, which First Man ended by jumping across the fire and remaining by himself in silence for the rest of the night. Next morning First Man went out early and called aloud to the people. "Come hither, all ye men," he said. "I wish to speak to you, but let all the women stay behind. I do not wish to see them." Soon all the males gathered, and he told them what his wife had said the night before. "They believe," he said, "that they can live without us. Let us see if they can hunt game and till the fields without our help. Let us see what sort of a living they can make by themselves. Let us leave them and persuade the Kishani to come with us. We will cross the stream, and when we are gone over, we will keep the raft on the other side." He sent for the hermaphrodites. They came, covered with meal, for they had been grinding corn. "What have you that you have made yourselves?" he asked. "We have each 2 mealing stones, and we have cups and bowls and baskets and many other things," they answered. "Then take these all along with you," he ordered, "and join us to cross the stream." Then all the men and the hermaphrodites assembled at the river and crossed to the north side on the raft, and they took over with them their stone axes and farm implements and everything they had made. When they had all crossed, they sent the raft down to the Kishani for them to cross. The latter came over, 6 genties of them, but they took their women with them. While some of the young men were crossing the stream, they cried at parting with their wives. Still they went at the bidding of their chief. The men left the women everything the latter had helped to make or raise. As soon as they had crossed the river, some of the men went out hunting, for the young boys needed food, and some set to work to chop down willows and build huts. They had themselves all sheltered in 4 days. That winter the women had abundance of food, and they feasted, sang, and had a merry time. They often came down to the bank of the river and called across to the men and taunted and reviled them. Next year the men prepared a few small fields and raised a little corn, but they did not have much corn to eat, and lived a good deal by hunting. The women planted all of the old farm, but they did not work it very well, so in the winter they had a small crop, and they did not sing and make merry as in the previous winter. In the second spring the women planted less, while the men planted more, cleared more land, and increased the size of their farm. Each year the fields and crops of the men increased, while those of the women diminished, and they began to suffer for want of food. Some went out and gathered the seeds of wild plants to eat. In the autumn of the 3rd year of separation, many women jumped into the river and tried to swim over, but they were carried under the surface of the water and were never seen again. In the 4th year the men had more food than they could eat. Corn and pumpkins lay untouched in the fields, while the women were starving. First Man at length began to think what the effect of his course might be. He saw that if he continued to keep the men and the women apart, the race might die out, so he called the men and spoke his thoughts to them. Some said, "Surely our race will perish," and others said, "What good is our abundance to us? We think so much of our poor women starving in our sight that we cannot eat." Then he sent a man to the shore to call across the stream to find if First Woman were still there, and to bid her come down to the bank if she were. She came to the bank, and First Man called to her and asked if she still thought she could live alone. "No," she replied, "we cannot live without our husbands." The men and the women were then told to assemble at the shores of the stream. The raft was sent over and the women were ferried across. They were made to bathe their bodies and dry them with meal. They were put in a corral and kept there until night, when they were let out to join the men in their feasts. 33. When they were let out of the corral, it was found that 3 were missing. After dark, voices were heard calling from the other side of the river. They were the voices of the missing ones, a mother and her 2 daughters. They begged to be ferried over, but the men told them it was too dark, that they must wait until morning. Hearing this, they jumped into the stream and tried to swim over. The mother succeeded in reaching the opposite bank and finding her husband. The daughters were seized by Tahotsodi, the water monster, and dragged down under the water. For 3 nights and 3 days the people heard nothing about the young women and supposed them lost forever. On the morning of the 4th day, the call of the gods was heard, 4 times as usual, and after the 4th call, White Body made his appearance, holding up 2 fingers and pointing to the river. The people supposed that these signs had reference to the lost girls. Some of the men crossed the stream on the raft and looked for the tracks of the lost ones. They traced the tracks to the edge of the water, but no farther. White Body went away, but soon returned, accompanied by Blue Body. White Body carried a large bowl of white shell, and Blue Body a large bowl of blue shell. They asked for a man and a woman to accompany them, and they went down to the river. They put both the bowls on the surface of the water and caused them to spin around. Beneath the spinning bowls the water opened, for it was hollow, and gave entrance to a large house of 4 rooms. The room in the east was made of the dark waters, the room in the south of the blue waters, the room in the west of the yellow waters, and the room in the north of waters of all colors. 36. The man and the woman descended, and Coyote followed them. They went first into the east room, but there they found nothing. Then they went into the south room, but there they found nothing. Next they went into the west room, where again they found nothing. At last they went into the north room, and there they beheld the water monster Tahotsodi, with the 2 girls he had stolen and 2 children of his own. The man and the woman demanded the children, and as he said nothing in reply, they took them and walked away. But as they went out, Coyote, unperceived by all, took the 2 children of Tahotsodi and carried them off under his robe. Coyote always wore his robe folded close around him and always slept with it thus folded, so no one was surprised to see that he still wore his robe in this way when he came up from the waters, and no one suspected that he had stolen the children of Tahotsodi. Next day the people were surprised to see deer, turkey, and antelope running past from east to west, and to see animals of 6 different kinds, 2 kinds of hawks, 2 kinds of squirrels, the hummingbird, and the bat, come into their camp as if for refuge. The game animals ran past in increasing numbers during the 3 days following. On the morning of the 4th day, when the white light rose, the people observed in the east a strange white gleam along the horizon, and they sent out the locust couriers to see what caused this unusual appearance. The locusts returned before sunset, and told the people that a vast flood of waters was fast approaching from the east. On hearing this, the people all assembled together, the Kishani with the others, in a great multitude, and they wailed and wept over the approaching catastrophe. They wept and moaned all night and could not sleep. When the white light arose in the east next morning, the waters were seen high as mountains encircling the whole horizon except in the west, and rolling on rapidly. The people packed up all their goods as fast as they could and ran up on a high hill nearby for temporary safety. Here they held a council. Someone suggested that perhaps the two squirrels, Heizetso and Heizaistsi, might help them. "We will try what we can do," said the squirrels. One planted a piñon seed, the other a juniper seed, and they grew so very fast that the people hoped that they would soon grow so tall that the flood could not reach their tops, and that all might find shelter there. But after the trees grew a little way, they began to branch out and grew no higher. Then the frightened people called on the weasels, Glodzokai and Glodiasalziani. One of these planted a spruce seed, and one a pine seed. The trees sprouted at once and grew fast, and again the people began to hope, but soon the trees commenced to branch, and they dwindled to slender points at the top, and ceased to grow higher. Now they were in the depths of despair, for the waters were coming nearer every moment, when they saw two men approaching the hill on which they were gathered. One of the approaching men was old and gray-haired, the other, who was young, walked in advance. They ascended the hill and passed through the crowd, speaking to no one. The young man sat down on the summit, the old man sat down behind him, and the locust sat down behind the old man, all facing the east. The elder took out 7 bags from under his robe and opened them. Each contained a small quantity of earth. He told the people that in these bags he had earth from the 7 sacred mountains. There were in the 4th world 7 sacred mountains, named and placed like the sacred mountains of the present Navajo land. "Ah, perhaps our father can do something for us," said the people. "I cannot, but my son may be able to help you," said the old man. Then they bade the son to help them, and he said he would if they all moved away from where he stood, faced to the west, and looked not around until he called them, for no one should see him at his work. They did as he desired, and in a few moments he called them to come to him. When they came, they saw that he had spread the sacred earth on the ground and planted in it 32 reeds, each of which had 32 joints. As they gazed, they beheld the roots of the reeds striking out into the soil and growing rapidly downward. A moment later, all the reeds joined together and became one reed of great size, with a hole in its eastern side. He bade them enter the hollow of the reed through this hole. When they were all safely inside, the opening closed, and none too soon, for scarcely had it closed when they heard the loud noise of the surging waters outside saying, "Yin, yin, yin." 37. The waters rose fast, but the reed grew faster, and soon it grew so high that it began to sway, and the people inside were in great fear lest, with their weight, it might break and topple over into the water. White Body, Blue Body, and Black Body were along. Black Body blew a great breath out through a hole in the top of the reed. A heavy dark cloud formed around the reed and kept it steady. But the reed grew higher and higher. Again it began to sway, and again the people within were in great fear, whereat he blew and made another cloud to steady the reed. By sunset it had grown up close to the sky, but it swayed and waved so much that they could not secure it to the sky until Black Body, who was uppermost, took the plume out of his headband and stuck it out through the top of the cane against the sky, and this is why the reed, Phragmites communis, always carries a plume on its head now. 38. Seeing no hole in the sky, they sent up the great hawk, Jinitso, to see what he could do. He flew up and began to scratch in the sky with his claws, and he scratched and scratched till he was lost to sight. After a while he came back and said that he scratched to where he could see light, but that he did not get through the sky. Next they sent up a locust. He was gone a long time, and when he came back he had this story to tell. He had gotten through to the upper world and came out on a little island in the center of a lake. When he got out, he saw approaching him from the east a black grebe, and from the west a yellow grebe. One of them said to him, "Who are you, and whence come you?" But he made no reply. The other then said, "We own half of this world, I in the east, my brother in the west. We give you a challenge. If you can do as we do, we shall give you 1/2 of the world. If you cannot, you must die. Each had an arrow made of the black wind. He passed the arrow from side to side through his heart and flung it down to Wanis City, the locust. That the latter picked up one of the arrows, ran it from side to side through his heart, as he had seen the grebes do, and threw it down. That the grebes swam away, one to the east and one to the west, and troubled him no more. When they had gone, 2 more grebes appeared, a blue one from the south and a shining one from the north. They spoke to him as the other grebes had spoken, and gave him the same challenge. Again he passed the arrow through his heart, and the grebes departed, leaving the land to the locust. To this day we see in every locust's sides the holes made by the arrows. But the hole the locust made in ascending was too small for many of the people, so they sent Badger up to make it larger. When Badger came back, his legs were stained black with the mud, and the legs of all badgers have been black ever since. Then first man and first woman led the way, and all the others followed them, and they climbed up through the hole to the surface of this, the 5th world. See Plate 3. Distant view of San Mateo Mountain, Sozal, New Mexico. The sacred mountain of the south. 2. Early events in the 5th world. The lake was bounded by high cliffs, from the top of which stretched a great plain. There are mountains around it now, but these have been created since the time of the emergence. Finding no way to get out of the lake, they called on Blue Body to help them. He had brought with him from the lower world 4 stones. He threw one of these towards each of the 4 cardinal points against the cliffs, breaking holes, through which the waters flowed away in 4 different directions. The lake did not altogether drain out by this means, but the bottom became bare in one place, connecting the island with the mainland. But the mud was so deep in this place that they still hesitated to cross, and they prayed to Nitlsi-Dilkowi, smooth wind, to come to their aid. Nitlsi-Dilkowi blew a strong wind, and in one day dried up the mud so that the people could easily walk over. While they were waiting for the ground to dry, the Kishani camped on the east side of the island and built a stone wall, which stands to this day, to lean against and to shelter them from the wind. That other people set up a shelter of brushwood. The women erected 4 poles, on which they stretched a deerskin, and under the shelter of this they played the game of 3 sticks, tsindi, one of the 4 games which they brought with them from the lower world. When they reached the mainland, they sought to divine their fate. To do this, someone threw a hide scraper into the water, saying, "If it sinks, we perish. If it floats, we live." It floated, and all rejoiced. But Coyote said, "Let me divine your fate." He picked up a stone, and saying, "If it sinks, we perish. If it floats, we live," he threw it into the water. It sank, of course, and all were angry with him and reviled him. But he answered them, saying, "If we all live and continue to increase as we have done, the earth will soon be too small to hold us, and there will be no room for the cornfields. It is better that each of us should live but a time on this earth, and then leave and make room for our children." They saw the wisdom of his words, and were silent. The day they arrived at the shore, they had 2 visitors, Puma and Wolf. "We have heard," said these, "that some new people had come up out of the ground, and we have come over to see them." Puma took a bride from among the new people. On the 4th day of the emergence, someone went to look at the hole through which they had come out, and he noticed water welling up there. Already it was nearly on a level with the top of the hole, and every moment it rose higher. In haste he ran back to his people and told them what he had seen. A council was called at once to consider the new danger that threatened them. First man who rose to speak said, pointing to Coyote, "Yonder is a rascal, and there is something wrong about him. He never takes off his robe, even when he lies down. I have watched him for a long time, and have suspected that he carries some stolen property under his robe. Let us search him." They tore the robe from Coyote's shoulders, and 2 strange little objects dropped out that looked something like buffalo calves, but were spotted all over in various colors. They were the young of Taihotsodi. At once the people threw them into the hole through which the waters were pouring. In an instant the water subsided and rushed away with a deafening noise to the lower world. 49. On the fifth night, one of the twin hermaphrodites ceased to breathe. They left her alone all that night, and, when morning came, Coyote proposed to lay her at rest among the rocks. This they did, but they all wondered what had become of her breath. They went in various directions to seek for its trail, but could find it nowhere. While they were hunting, two men went near the hole through which they had come from the lower world. It occurred to one of them to look down into the hole. He did so, and he saw the dead one seated by the side of the river in the fourth world, combing her hair. He called to his companion, and the latter came and looked down too. They returned to their people and related what they had seen, but in 4 days both these men died, and ever since the Navajos have feared to look upon the dead, or to behold a ghost, lest they die themselves. 60. After this it was told around that the Kishani, who were in camp at a little distance from the others, had brought with them from the lower world an ear of corn for seed. Some of the unruly ones proposed to go to the camp of the Kishani and take the corn away from them, but others, of better counsel, said that this would be wrong, that the Kishani had had as much trouble as the rest, and if they had more foresight, they had a right to profit by it. In spite of these words, some of the young men went and demanded the corn of the Kishani. The latter said, after some angry talk on both sides, "We will break the ear in two and give you whichever half you choose." The young men agreed to this bargain, and the woman who owned the ear broke it in the middle and laid the pieces down for the others to choose. The young men looked at the pieces and were considering which they would take, when Coyote, getting impatient, picked up the tip end of the ear and made off with it. The Kishani kept the butt, and this is the reason the Pueblo Indians have today better crops of corn than the Navajos. But the Pueblos had become alarmed at the threats and angry language of their neighbors and moved away from them, and this is why the Navajos and Pueblos now live apart from one another. After the Kishani moved away, First Man and First Woman, Black Body and Blue Body, set out to build the 7 sacred mountains of the present Navajo land. They made them all of earth, which they had brought from similar mountains in the fourth world. The mountains they made were Cisnajni in the east, Tzotzil, Taylor, San Mateo in the south, Docozlid, San Francisco in the west, Didenza, San Juan in the north, with Zolnautl, Solihi, and Echidonistani, Hosta Butte in the middle of the land. 61. Through Cisnajni in the east, they ran a bolt of lightning to fasten it to the earth. They decorated it with white shells, white lightning, white corn, dark clouds, and rain. They set a big dish or bowl of shell on its summit, and in it they put 2 eggs of the pigeon to make feathers for the mountain. The eggs they covered with a sacred buckskin to make them hatch. There are many wild pigeons in this mountain now. All these things they covered with a sheet of daylight, and they put the rock crystal boy and the rock crystal girl into the mountain to dwell. Tzotzil, the mountain of the south, they fastened to the earth with a great stone knife thrust through from top to bottom. They adorned it with turquoise, with dark mist, she-rain, and all different kinds of wild animals. On its summit they placed a dish of turquoise. In this they put 2 eggs of the bluebird, which they covered with sacred buckskin. There are many bluebirds in Tzotzil now, and over all they spread a covering of blue sky. The boy who carries 1 turquoise and the girl who carries 1 grain of corn were put into the mountain to dwell. Docozlid, the mountain of the west, they fastened to the earth with a sunbeam. They adorned it with haliotis shell, with black clouds, he-rain, yellow corn, and all sorts of wild animals. They placed a dish of haliotis shell on the top, and laid in this 2 eggs of the yellow warbler, covering them with sacred buckskins. There are many yellow warblers now in Docozlid. Over all they spread a yellow cloud, and they sent white corn boy and yellow corn girl to dwell there. Deep in Za, the mountain in the north, they fastened with a rainbow. They adorned it with black beads, passini, with the dark mist, with different kinds of plants and many kinds of wild animals. On its top they put a dish of passini. In this they placed 2 eggs of the blackbird, over which they laid a sacred buckskin. Over all they spread a covering of darkness. Lastly they put the pollen boy and grasshopper girl in the mountain to dwell there. The zonautal was fastened with a sunbeam. They decorated it with goods of all kinds, with the dark cloud and the male rain. They put nothing on top of it. They left its summit free in order that warriors might fight there, but they put boy who produces goods and girl who produces goods here to live. The mountain of Tsolihe they fastened to the earth with Nilzutlo, the streak or cord of rain. They decorated it with pollen, the dark mist, and the female rain. They placed on top of it a live bird named Jagali, 68. Such birds abound there now, and they put in the mountain to dwell, boy who produces jewels, and girl who produces jewels. 64. The mountain of Akidunistani they fastened to the earth with a sacred stone called Si Hadahonage, or mirage stone. They decorated it with black clouds, the he-rain, and all sorts of plants. They placed a live grasshopper on its summit, and they put the mirage stone boy and the carnelian girl there to dwell. 66. They still had the three lights and the darkness, as in the lower worlds. But first man and first woman thought they might form some lights which would make the world brighter. After much study and debate, they planned to make the sun and moon. For the sun they made a round flat object like a dish out of a clear stone called Sizagi. They set turquoises around the edge, and outside of these they put rays of red rain, lightning, and snakes of many kinds. At first they thought of putting 4 points on it, as they afterwards did on the stars, but they changed their minds and made it round. They made the moon of sea to sun, star rock, a kind of crystal. They bordered it with white shells, and they put on its face Hadilkies, sheet lightning, and Tulanistsi, all kinds of water. 67. Then they counseled as to what they should do with the sun, where they should make it rise first. The wind of the east begged that it might be brought to his land, so they dragged it off to the edge of the world where he dwelt. There they gave it to the man who planted the great cane in the lower world, and appointed him to carry it. To an old gray-haired man, who had joined them in the lower world, the moon was given to carry. These men had no names before, but now the former received the name of Tsohanoi, or Tsinyanoi, and the latter the name of Klahanoi. When they were about to depart, in order to begin their labors, the people were sorry, for they were beloved by all. But first man said to the sorrowing people, "Mourn not for them, for you will see them in the heavens, and all that die will be theirs in return for their labors." See notes and for additions to the legend. Then the people, Dene, Navajos, began to travel. They journeyed towards the east, and after 1 day's march they reached Nyakai, white spot on the earth, and camped for the night. Here a woman brought forth, but her offspring was not like a child. It was round, misshapen, and had no head. The people counseled and determined that it should be thrown into a gully. So they threw it away, but it lived and grew up and became the monster Tilgit, one who afterwards destroyed so many of the people. Next day they wandered farther to the east and camped at night at Teiska, rock bending back. Here was born another misshapen creature, which had something like feathers on both its shoulders. It looked like nothing that was ever seen before, so the people concluded to throw this away also. They took it to an alkali bed close by and cast it away there. But it lived and grew and became the terrible Sinahel, one of whom I shall have much to tell later. The next night, traveling still to the east, they camped at Sibinahotil, a broad high cliff like a wall, and here a woman bore another strange creature. It had no head, but had a long pointed end where the head ought to be. This object was deposited in the cliff, in a hole which was afterwards sealed up with a stone. They left it there to die, but it grew up and became the destroyer, Sitahotsiltali, one of whom we shall tell hereafter. Because he was closed into the rock, his hair grew into it and he could not fall. The next night, when they stopped at Siaaltsini, rock with black hole, twins were born. They were both roundish, with one end tapering to a point. There were no signs of limbs or head, but there were depressions which had somewhat the appearance of eyes. The people laid them on the ground, and next day, when they moved camp, abandoned them. Cialcini is shaped like a Navajo hut, with a door in the east. It is supposed that, when they were abandoned to die, the twin monsters went into this natural hut to dwell. They grew up, however, and became the Bine Ahani, who slew with their eyes, and of whom we shall have more to tell. All these monsters were the fruit of the transgressions of the women in the fourth world, when they were separated from the men. Other monsters were born on the march, and others, again, sprang from the blood which had been shed during the birth of the first monsters, and all these grew up to become enemies and destroyers of the people. When they left Cialcini, they turned toward the west, and journeyed until they came to a place called Tuinsoisoko, water in a narrow gully, and here they remained for 13 years, making farms and planting corn, beans, and pumpkins every spring. In those days the four-footed beasts, the birds, and the snakes were people also, like ourselves, and built houses and lived near our people close to Deep Nza. They increased and became the cliff dwellers. It must have been the flying creatures who built the dwellings high on the cliffs, for if they had not wings, how could they reach their houses? From Tuinsoisoko they moved to Lakaya, standing white rock, and here they sojourned again for 13 years. From the latter place they moved to Pahakai, white on face of cliff, and here once more they remained for a period of 13 years. During this time the monsters began to devour the people. From Tsipahakai, they moved to the neighborhood of Quintile, Broadhouse, in the Chaco Canyon, where the ruins of the great pueblo still stand. When the wanderers arrived, the pueblo was in process of building, but was not finished. The way it came to be built, you shall now hear. Some time before, there had descended among the pueblos from the heavens a divine gambler, or gambling god, named Noilpai, or he who wins men at play. His talisman was a great piece of turquoise. When he came, he challenged the people to all sorts of games and contests, and in all of these he was successful. He won from them, first, their property, then their women and children, and finally some of the men themselves. Then he told them he would give them part of their property back in payment if they would build a great house. So when the Navajos came, the pueblos were busy building in order that they might release their enthralled relatives and their property. They were also busy making a racetrack and preparing for all kinds of games of chance and skill. When all was ready and 4 days' notice had been given, 12 men came from the neighboring pueblo of Quintile, Blue House, to compete with the great gambler. They bet their own persons, and after a brief contest they lost themselves to Noilpai. Again, a notice of 4 days was given, and again 12 men of Quintile, relatives of the former 12, came to play, and these also lost themselves. For the third time an announcement, 4 days in advance of a game, was given. This time some women were among the 12 contestants, and they too lost themselves. All were put to work on the building of Quintile as soon as they forfeited their liberty. At the end of another 4 days, the children of these men and women came to try to win back their parents, but they succeeded only in adding themselves to the number of the gambler's slaves. On a 5th trial, after 4 days' warning, 12 leading men of Blue House were lost, among them the chief of the pueblo. On a 6th, duly announced gambling day, 12 more men, all important persons, staked their liberty and lost it. Up to this time the Navajos had kept count of the winnings of Noilpai, but afterwards people from other pueblos came in such numbers to play and lose that they could keep count no longer. In addition to their own persons, the later victims brought in beads, shells, turquoise, and all sorts of valuables, and gambled them away. With the labor of all these slaves, it was not long until the great Quintile was finished. But all this time the Navajos had been merely spectators, and had taken no part in the games. One day the voice of the beneficent god, Hesialti, was heard faintly in the distance crying his usual call, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. His voice was heard, as it is always heard, 4 times, each time nearer and nearer, and immediately after the last call, which was loud and clear, Hesialti appeared at the door of a hut where dwelt a young couple who had no children, and with them he communicated by means of signs. He told them that the people of Quintile had lost at game with Noilpai 2 great shells, the greatest treasures of the pueblo. that the son had coveted these shells and had begged them from the gambler, that the latter had refused the request of the son, and the son was angry. In consequence of all this, as Hesioti related, in 12 days from his visit certain divine personages would meet in the mountains, in a place which he designated, to hold a great ceremony. He invited the young man to be present at the ceremony and disappeared. The Navajo kept count of the passing days. On the 12th day he repaired to the appointed place, and there he found a great assemblage of the gods. There were Hesioti, Haganant his son, Ni-Utsi, wind, Zaliel, darkness, Zapani, bat, Listso, great snake, Sealkalai, a little bird, Nasi-Z, gopher, and many others. Besides these there were present a number of pets or domesticated animals belonging to the gambler, who were dissatisfied with their lot, were anxious to be free, and would gladly obtain their share of the spoils in case their master was ruined. Niltsi, wind, had spoken to them, and they had come to enter into the plot against Noilpai. All night the gods danced and sang and performed their mystic rites for the purpose of giving to the son of Hasehogan powers, as a gambler, equal to those of Noilpai. When the morning came they washed the young neophyte all over, dried him with meal, dressed him in clothes exactly like those the gambler wore, and in every way made him look as much like the gambler as possible, and then they counseled as to what other means they should take to outwit Noilpai. In the first place, they desired to find out how he felt about having refused to his father, the sun, the 2 great shells. "I will do this," said Niltsi, wind, "for I can penetrate everywhere, and no one can see me." But the other said, "No, you can go everywhere, but you cannot travel without making a noise and disturbing people. Let Zaliel, darkness, go on this errand, for he also goes wherever he wills, yet he makes no noise." So Zaliel went to the gambler's house, entered his room, went all through his body while he slept, and searched well his mind, and he came back saying, "Noilpai is sorry for what he has done." Niltsi, however, did not believe this. So, although his services had been before refused, he repaired to the chamber where the gambler slept, and went all through his body and searched well his mind. But he too came back saying Noilpai was sorry that he had refused to give the great shells to his father. One of the games they proposed to play is called Taka Thad Sada, or the 13 chips. It is played with 13 thin flat pieces of wood, which are colored red on one side and left white or uncolored on the other side. Success depends on the number of chips which, being thrown upwards, fall with their white sides up. "Leave the game to me," said the bat. "I have made 13 chips that are white on both sides. I will hide myself in the ceiling, and when our champion throws up his chips, I will grasp them and throw down my chips instead." Another game they were to play is called Nanzos. It is played with 2 long sticks or poles of peculiar shape and construction, one marked with red and the other with black, and a single hoop. A long, many-tailed string, called the turkey claw, is secured to the end of each pole. "Leave Nanzos to me," said Great Snake. "I will hide myself in the hoop and make it fall where I please." Another game was one called Tsief Betsil, or push on the wood. In this the contestants push against a tree until it is torn from its roots and falls. "I will see that this game is won," said Nasi-Z, the gopher. "I will gnaw the roots of the tree so that he who shoves it may easily make it fall." In the game Tsal, or ball, the object was to hit the ball so that it would fall beyond a certain line. "I will win this game for you," said the little bird Sealkalai, "for I will hide within the ball and fly with it wherever I want to go. Do not hit the ball hard, give it only a light tap, and depend on me to carry it." The pets of the gambler begged the wind to blow hard, so that they might have an excuse to give their master for not keeping due watch when he was in danger, and in the morning the wind blew for them a strong gale. At dawn the whole party of conspirators left the mountain and came down to the brow of the canyon to watch until sunrise. Noilpai had 2 wives, who were the prettiest women in the whole land. Wherever she went, each carried in her hand a stick with something tied on the end of it, as a sign that she was the wife of the great gambler. It was their custom for one of them to go every morning at sunrise to a neighboring spring to get water. So at sunrise the watchers on the brow of the cliff saw one of the wives coming out of the gambler's house with a water jar on her head, whereupon the son of Hasehogan descended into the canyon and followed her to the spring. She was not aware of his presence until she had filled her water jar. Then she supposed it to be her own husband, whom the youth was dressed and adorned to represent, and she allowed him to approach her. She soon discovered her error, however, but, deeming it prudent to say nothing, she suffered him to follow her into the house. As he entered, he observed that many of the slaves had already assembled. Perhaps they were aware that some trouble was in store for their master. The latter looked up with an angry face. He felt jealous when he saw the stranger entering immediately after his wife. He said nothing of this, however, but asked at once the important question, "Have you come to gamble with me?" This he repeated 4 times, and each time the young Hasehogan said, "No." Thinking the stranger feared to play with him, Noilpai went on challenging him recklessly. "I'll bet myself against yourself. I'll bet my feet against your feet. I'll bet my legs against your legs." And so on. He offered to bet every and any part of his body against the same part of his adversary, ending by mentioning his hair. In the meantime, the party of divine ones who had been watching from above came down, and people from the neighboring pueblos came in, and among these were 2 boys who were dressed in costumes similar to those worn by the wives of the gambler. The young Hasehogan pointed to these and said, "I will bet my wives against your wives." The great gambler accepted the wager, and the 4 persons, 2 women and 2 mock women, were placed sitting in a row near the wall. First they played the game of 13 chips. The bat assisted, as he had promised, the son of Hasehogan, and the latter soon won the game, and with it the wives of Noilpai. This was the only game played inside the house. Then all went out of doors, and games of various kinds were played. First they tried Nanzos. The track already prepared lay east and west, but prompted by the wind god, the stranger insisted on having a track made from north to south, and again, at the bidding of wind, he chose the red stick. The son of Hasehogan threw the wheel. At first it seemed about to fall on the gambler's pole, in the turkey claw of which it was entangled, but to the great surprise of the gambler, it extricated itself, rolled farther on, and fell on the pole of his opponent. The latter ran to pick up the ring, lest Noilpai in doing so might hurt the snake inside, but the gambler was so angry that he threw his stick away and gave up the game, hoping to do better in the next contest, which was that of pushing down trees. For this the great gambler pointed out 2 small trees, but his opponent insisted that larger trees must be found. After some search, they agreed upon 2 of good size, which grew close together, and of these the wind told the youth which one he must select. The gambler strained with all his might at his tree, but could not move it, while his opponent, when his turn came, shoved the other tree prostrate with little effort, for its roots had all been severed by gopher. Then followed a variety of games, on which Noilpai staked his wealth in shells and precious stones, his houses, and many of his slaves, and lost all. The last game was that of the ball. On the line over which the ball was to be knocked, all the people were assembled. On one side were those who still remained slaves, on the other side were the freedmen and those who had come to wager themselves, hoping to rescue their kinsmen. Noilpai bet on this game the last of his slaves and his own person. The gambler struck his ball a heavy blow, but it did not reach the line. The stranger gave his but a light tap, and the bird within it flew with it far beyond the line, whereat the released captives jumped over the line and joined their people. The victor ordered all the shells, beads, and precious stones, and the great shells, to be brought forth. He gave the beads and shells to Hesioti, that they might be distributed among the gods. The 2 great shells were given to the son did 77. In the meantime, Noilpai sat to one side saying bitter things, bemoaning his fate, and cursing and threatening his enemies. "I will kill you all with the lightning. I will send war and disease among you. May the cold freeze you. May the fire burn you. May the waters drown you," he cried. "He has cursed enough," whispered Nilsi to the son of Hasehogan. "Put an end to his angry words." So the young victor called Noilpai to him and said, "You have bet yourself and have lost. You are now my slave and must do my bidding. You are not a god, for my power has prevailed against yours." The victor had a bow of magic power named Edian Diliel, or the bow of darkness. He bent this upwards, and placing the string on the ground, he bade his slave stand on the string. Then he shot Noilpai up into the sky as if he had been an arrow. Up and up he went, growing smaller and smaller to the sight, till he faded to a mere speck, and finally disappeared altogether. As he flew upwards, he was heard to mutter in the angry tones of abuse and imprecation, until he was too far away to be heard, but no one could distinguish anything he said as he ascended. He flew up in the sky until he came to the home of Bekot City, the god who carries the moon, and who is supposed by the Navajos to be identical with the god of the Americans. He is very old, and dwells in a long row of stone houses. When Noilpai arrived at the house of Bekot City, he related to the latter all his misadventures in the lower world and said, "Now I am poor, and this is why I have come to see you." "You need be poor no longer," said Bekot City. "I will provide for you." So he made for the gambler pets or domestic animals of new kinds, different to those which he had in the Chaco Valley. He made for him sheep, asses, horses, swine, goats, and fowls. He also gave him baeta and other cloths of bright colors, more beautiful than those woven by his slaves at Quintile. He made, too, a new people, the Mexicans, for the gambler to rule over, and then he sent him back to this world again. But he descended far to the south of his former abode, and reached the earth in Old Mexico. Noilpai's people increased greatly in Mexico, and after a while they began to move towards the north and build towns along the Rio Grande. Noilpai came with them until they arrived at a place north of Santa Fe. There they ceased building, and he returned to Old Mexico, where he still lives, and where he is now the Nakai Digini, or god of the Mexicans. The Navajo who went at the bidding of the sun to the tryst of the gods stayed with them till the gambler was shot into the sky. Then he returned to his people and told all he had seen. The young stranger went back to Tsigihi, the home of the Ye. The wanderers were not long at Quintile, but while they were, they met some of the daylight people. From Quintile they moved to Itandatsos, and here Mai, the coyote, married a Navajo woman. He remained in the Navajo camp 9 days, and then he went to visit Dasani, the porcupine. The latter took a piece of bark, scratched his nose with it till the blood flowed freely out over it, put it on the fire, and there roasted it slowly until it turned into a piece of fine meat. Porcupine then spread some clean herbs on the ground, laid the roasted meat on these, and invited his visitor to partake. Coyote was delighted. He had never had a nicer meal, and when he was leaving, he invited his host to return the visit in 2 days. At the appointed time, Porcupine presented himself at the hut of Coyote. The latter greeted his guest, bade him be seated, and rushed out of the house. In a few minutes he returned with a piece of bark. With this he scratched his nose, as he had seen Porcupine doing, and allowed the blood to flow. He placed the bloody bark over the fire, where in a moment it burst into flames and was soon reduced to ashes. Coyote hung his head in shame, and Porcupine went home hungry. Soon after this, Coyote visited Maitso, the wolf. The latter took down from among the rafters of his hut 2 of the old-fashioned red arrows with wooden heads, such as the Navajos used in the ancient days. He pulled out the wooden points, rolled them on his thigh, moistened them in his mouth, and buried them in the hot ashes beside the fire. After waiting a little while and talking to his guest, he raked out from the ashes where he had buried the arrow points 2 fine cooked puddings of minced meat. These he laid on a mat of fresh herbs and told Coyote to help himself. Coyote again enjoyed his meal greatly, and soon after, when he rose to leave, he invited Wolf to pay him a visit in 2 days. Wolf went in due time to the house of Coyote, and when he had seated himself, the host took 2 arrowheads, as Wolf had done, rolled them on his thigh, put them in his mouth, and buried them in the hot ashes. After waiting a while, he raked the ashes and found nothing but 2 pieces of charred wood where he had placed the arrowheads. This time he gave no evidence of his disappointment, but sat and talked with his guest just as if nothing had happened, until Wolf, seeing no sign of dinner and becoming very hungry, got up and went home. In those days, the chicken hawks and the hummingbirds were known as great hunters. They were friendly to one another and dwelt together in one camp. Coyote went to pay them a visit, and when he arrived at the camp, he entered one of the huts of the hummingbirds. He found therein 2 beautiful hummingbird maidens, gaily dressed, with rows of deer-hoof pendants on their skirts and shoulders. He lay down in the lodge and said to the maidens, "Where is everybody today? I heard there were many people camped here, but the camp seems deserted." The maidens replied, "There are many people camped here, but today the men are all out hunting." Now, Coyote was a dandy. He was always beautifully dressed. He had a nice otterskin quiver, and his face was painted in spots. The maidens, when they had looked well at him, bent their heads together and whispered to one another, "He is a handsome young man. He is beautifully dressed. He must be a person of some importance." He spent the day gossiping with the maidens and telling them wonderful tales about himself. "Would you know who I am?" he said. "I am the god of Tsisnochny Mountain. I have no need to hunt. All I have to do is to will the death of an animal and it dies. Your people have no need to wear themselves out hunting for game. I can kill all they want without labor." At nightfall, when the hunters returned, the maidens left the lodge, went to where their friends were assembled, and told them all about the visitor. When the maidens had finished their story, the chief directed one of the young men to go over to the hut, peep in over the curtain in the doorway, and see what the stranger looked like. The young man did as he was bidden, making no noise, and looked into the lodge unobserved by Coyote. When he returned to the chief, he said, "The stranger is a fine-looking man and is beautifully dressed. Perhaps he is indeed a god." The chief then said, "It may be that all is true which he has told the maidens. We have to travel far in all sorts of weather and to work hard to secure food. He may know some way to save us from labor, so let us be kind to him. Go, one of you maidens, back to the lodge to serve him." Hearing these words, the younger of the 2 young women returned to the lodge. Her clothing was ornamented with many pendants of bone and hoof that rattled with every movement she made, and for this reason Coyote named her Ck-Natsili, or young woman who rattles. In the morning she went to the lodge where her people were, and where a good breakfast was already prepared, and she brought a large dishful of the food for Coyote to eat. As she was about to depart with the food, her people charged her to tell Coyote nothing of certain bad neighbors of theirs, lest he might visit them and work wonders for their benefit. But their injunctions came too late. Already, Ck-Natsili had told him all about these bad neighbors, and he had made up his mind to visit them. When breakfast was over, she said, "Now the hunters are going out." He replied, "I will go with them." So he joined the party, and they traveled together till they got to the brow of a high hill which overlooked an extensive country. Here Coyote told his companions to remain concealed while he went into the plain and drove the game toward them. When he got out of sight, he tied to his tail a long faggot of shredded cedar bark, which he set on fire, and then he ran over the country in a wide circle as fast as he could go. Everywhere the faggot touched it set fire to the grass, and raised a long line of flame and smoke which drove the antelope up to where the hunters were concealed. A great quantity of game was killed. The hunters returned laden with meat, and their faith in Coyote was unbounded. Next morning they all went out once more to hunt. Again the hunters concealed themselves on the brow of a hill, and again Coyote tied the blazing faggot to his tail and ran. The people on the hilltop watched the line of fire advancing over the plain, but when it turned around as if to come back to the place from which it started, it suddenly ceased. Much game was driven toward the party in ambush, but Coyote did not return, and the hunters went to work cutting up the meat and cooking food for themselves. Coyote, in the meantime, had gone to seek the bad neighbors. He untied his brand at the place where the hunters had seen the line of fire cease, and wandered off in a different direction. After a while he came to 2 great trees, a spruce and a pine, growing close together and filled with chattering birds of 2 kinds. The spruce tree was filled with birds called tsidibes, and the pine tree with birds called tsidisauci. They were all busily engaged in playing a game which Coyote had never seen before. They would pull out their eyes, toss these up to the top of the tree, cry, "Drop back, my eyes, drop back!" and catch the eyes as they descended in their proper sockets. Coyote watched their play for a long time, and at length, becoming fascinated with the game, he cried out to the tsi-di-saucy in the pine tree, "Pull out my eyes for me, I want to play too." "No," they replied, "we will have nothing to do with you." Again and again he begged to be allowed to join in the sport, and again they refused him. But when he had pleaded for the fourth time, they flew down to where Coyote sat, and taking sharp sticks, they gouged his eyes out. The eyes were thrown up to the top of the pine tree, and when they fell down, Coyote caught them in his orbits and could see again as well as ever. Coyote was delighted with the result of his first venture, and he begged them to pull his eyes out again, but they said angrily, "We do not want to play with you. We have done enough for you now. Go and leave us." But he continued to whine and beg until again they pulled out his eyes and tossed them up with the same happy result as before. Thus 4 times were his eyes pulled out, thrown upward, and caught back again in the head. But when he begged them to pull out his eyes for the 5th time, they went to a distance and held a council among themselves. When they returned, they pulled his eyes out once more, but this time they took pains to pull out the strings of the eyes, optic nerves, at the same time. These they tied together, and when the eyes were again flung up in the tree, they caught on one of the branches, and there they stayed. Now Coyote was in mortal distress. "Drop back, my eyes, drop back!" he cried. But back they never came, and he sat there with his nose pointed up toward the top of the tree, and he howled and prayed and wept. At last the birds took pity on him and said, "Let us make other eyes for him." So they took a couple of partly dried pieces of pine gum and rolled them into 2 balls. These were stuck into the empty sockets, and although they were not good eyes, they gave him sight enough to see his way home. The gum was yellow, and for this reason coyotes have had yellow eyes ever since. He crept back, as best he could, to the place where he had left the hunters and where he found them cutting and cooking meat. He sat down facing the fire, but he soon found that his gum eyes were getting soft with the heat, so he turned his side to the fire. The hunters gave him a piece of raw liver, supposing he would cook it himself. Not daring to turn towards the fire, lest his eyes should melt altogether, he threw the liver on the coals without looking, and when he tried afterwards to take it up, he thrust his hand at random into the fire, and caught nothing but hot coals that burned him. Fearing that his strange action was observed, he tried to pass it off as a joke, and every time he picked up a hot coal he cried, "Don't burn me, liver! Don't burn me, liver!" After a while the hunters seated around the fire began to notice his singular motions and words, and one said to another, "He does not act as usual. Go and see what is the matter with him." The hunter who was thus bidden went over in front of Coyote, looked at him closely, and saw melted gum pouring out from between his eyelids. It happened that during the day, while Coyote was absent, a messenger had come to the camp of the hunters from another camp to tell them that an individual named Mai, or Coyote, had left his home and had been seen going toward the camp of the hummingbirds, and to warn them against him. "He is an idler and a trickster. Beware of him," said the messenger. So when they found out the condition of their visitor, they said, "This must be Coyote of whom we have heard. He has been playing with the tsi-di-saucy and has lost his eyes." When they had arrived at this conclusion, they started for camp and led the blind Coyote along. In the meantime, they devised a plan for getting rid of him. When they got home, they took the rattling dress of Ck Nazi Lee and gave her an ordinary garment to wear. Then a chicken hawk took the dress in his beak, and flying a little distance above the ground, shook the dress in front of Coyote. The latter, thinking the maiden was there, approached the sound, and as he did so, the chicken hawk flew farther away, still shaking the dress. Coyote followed the rattling sound, and was thus led on to the brink of a deep canyon. Here the hawk shook the dress beyond the edge of the precipice. Coyote jumped toward where he heard the sound, fell to the bottom of the canyon, and was dashed to pieces. But for all this, he did not die. He did not, like other beings, keep his vital principle in his chest, where it might easily be destroyed. He kept it in the tip of his nose and in the end of his tail, where no one would expect to find it. So after a while he came to life again, went back to the camp of the birds, and asked for CK Nazi Lee. They told him she was gone away, and ordered him angrily to leave, telling him they knew who he was, and that he was a worthless fellow. Coyote left the camp of the birds, and wandered around till he came to the house of one of the Ani or alien gods, named Yelapahi, or Brown Giant. He was half as tall as the tallest pine tree, and he was evil and cruel. Coyote said to the Brown Giant, "Yelapahi, I want to be your servant. I can be of great help to you. The reason that you often fail to catch your enemies is that you cannot run fast enough. I can run fast and jump far. I can jump over 4 bushes at one bound. I can run after your enemies and help you to catch them." "My cousin," responded Brown Giant, "you can do me service if you will." Coyote then directed the giant to build a sweat house for himself, and while the latter was building it, Coyote set out on another errand. In those days there was a maiden of renowned beauty in the land. She was the only sister of 11 divine brothers. She had been sought in marriage by the sun and by many potent gods, but she had refused them all because they could not comply with certain conditions which she imposed up all suitors. It was to visit her that Coyote went when he left Yelapahi at work on the sweat house. "Why have you refused so many beautiful gods who want you for a wife?" said Coyote to the maiden after he had greeted her. "It would profit you nothing to know," she replied, "for you could not comply with any one of my demands." 4 times he asked her this question, and 3 times he got the same reply. When he asked her the 4th time, she answered, "In the first place, I will not marry anyone who has not killed one of the Ani." When he heard this, Coyote arose and returned to the place where he had left Yelapahi. On his way back, he looked carefully for the bone of some big animal which Great Wolf had slain and eaten. At length he found a long thigh bone which suited his purpose. He took this home with him, concealing it under his shirt. When Coyote got back, Yelapahi had finished the sweat house. Together they built the fire, heated the stones, and spread the carpet of leaves. Coyote hung over the doorway 4 blankets of sky, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 yellow, and 1 black, and put the hot stones into the lodge. Then they hung their arms and clothes on a neighboring tree, entered the sudatory, and sat down to 83. "Now," said Coyote, "if you want to become a fast runner, I will show you what to do. You must cut the flesh of your thigh down to the bone, and then break the bone. It will heal again in a moment, and when it heals, you will be stronger and swifter than ever. I often do this myself, and every time I do it, I am fleeter of foot than I was before. I will do it now, so that you may observe how it is done." Coyote then produced a great stone knife and pretended to cut his own thigh, wailing and crying in the meantime, and acting as if he suffered great pain. After a while of this pretense, he put the old femur on top of his thigh, held it by both ends, and said to the giant, "I have now reached the bone. Feel it." When the giant had put forth his hand, in the absolute darkness of the sweat house, and felt the bare bone, Coyote shoved the hand away and struck the bone hard with the edge of his knife several times until he broke the bone, and he made the giant feel the fractured ends. Then he threw away the old bone, rubbed spittle on his thigh, prayed and sang, and in a little while presented his sound thigh to the giant for his examination, saying, "See, my limb is healed again. It is as well as ever." When he had thus spoken, Coyote handed his knife to Yelapahi, and the latter, with many tears and loud howls, slowly amputated his own thigh. When the work was done, he put the 2 severed ends together, spat upon them, sang and prayed as Coyote had done. "Tohei, Tohei, Tohei," he cried. "Heal together, grow together," he commanded, but the severed ends would not unite. "Cousin," he called to Coyote, "help me to heal this leg." Coyote thought it was now time to finish his work. He ran from the sweat house, seized his bow, and discharged his arrows into the helpless Yelapahi, who soon expired with many wounds. Coyote scalped his victim and tied the scalp to the top of a branch which he broke from a cedar tree. As further evidence of his victory, he took the quiver and weapons of the slain and set out for the lodge of the maiden. He knew she could not mistake the scalp, for the Yei, in those days, had yellow hair such as no other people had. When he reached the lodge, he said to the maiden, "Here is the scalp, and here are the weapons of one of the Anai. Now you must marry me." "No," said the maiden, "not yet. I have not told you all that one must do in order to win me. He must be killed 4 times and come to life again 4 times. Do you speak the truth? Have you told me all?" said Coyote. "Yes, I speak only the truth," she replied. 4 times he asked this question, and 4 times he received the same answer. When she had spoken for the 4th time, Coyote said, "Here I am. Do with me as you will." The maiden took him a little distance from the lodge, laid him on the ground, beat him with a great club until she thought she had smashed every bone in his body, and left him for dead. But the point of his nose and the end of his tail she did not smash. She hurried back to her hut, for she had much work to do. She was the only woman in a family of 12. She cooked the food and tanned the skins, and besides she made baskets. At this particular time she was engaged in making 4 baskets. When she returned to the lodge, she sat down and went on with her basket work, but she had not worked long before she became aware that someone was standing in the doorway, and looking up, she beheld Coyote. "Here I am," he said. "I have won 1 game. There are only 3 more to win." She made no reply, but took him off farther than she had taken him before, and pounded him to pieces with a club. She threw the pieces away in different directions and returned to her work again, but she had not taken many stitches in her basket when again the resurrected Coyote appeared in the doorway, saying, "I have won 2 games. There are only 2 more to win." Again she led him forth, but took him still farther away from the lodge than she had taken him before, and with a heavy club pounded him into a shapeless mass, until she thought he must certainly be dead. She stood a long time gazing at the pounded flesh, and studying what she would do with it to make her work sure. She carried the mass to a great rock, and there she beat it into still finer pieces. These she scattered farther than she had scattered the pieces before, and went back to the house. But she had still failed to injure the 2 vital spots. It took the Coyote a longer time on this occasion than on the previous occasions to pull himself together. Still, she had not wrought much on her basket when he again presented himself and said, "I have won 3 games. There is but 1 more game to win." The 4th time she led him farther away than ever. She not only mashed him to pieces, but she mixed the pieces with earth, ground the mixture, like corn, between 2 stones, until it was ground to a fine powder, and scattered this powder far and wide. But again she neglected to crush the point of the nose and the tip of the tail. She went back to the lodge and worked a long time undisturbed. She had just begun to entertain hopes that she had seen the last of her unwelcome suitor when again he entered the door. Now, at last, she could not refuse him. He had fulfilled all her conditions, and she consented to become his wife. He remained all the afternoon. At sunset they heard the sound of approaching footsteps, and she said, "My brothers are coming. Some of them are evil of mind and may do you harm. You must hide yourself." She hid him behind a pile of skins and told him to be quiet. When the brothers entered the lodge, they said to their sister, "Here is some fat young venison which we bring you. Put it down to boil, and put some of the fat into the pot, for our faces are burned by the wind and we want to grease them." The woman slept on the north side of the lodge and kept there her household utensils. She had about half of the lodge to herself. The men slept on the south side, the eldest next to the door. The pot was put on and the fire replenished, and when it began to burn well, an odor denoting the presence of some beast filled the lodge. One of the brothers said, "It smells as if some animal had been in the woodpile. Let us throw out this wood and get fresh sticks from the bottom of the pile." They did as he desired, but the unpleasant odors continued to annoy them, and again the wood was taken from the fire and thrown away. Thinking the whole pile of wood was tainted with the smell, they went out, broke fresh branches from trees, and built the fire up again, but this did not abate the rank odor in the least. Then one said, "Perhaps the smell is in the water. Tell us, little sister, where did you get the water in the pot?" "I got it at the spring where I always get it," she replied. But they got her to throw out the water and fill the pot with snow, and to put the meat down to boil again. In spite of all their pains, the stench was as bad as ever. At length one of the brothers turned to his sister and said, "What is the cause of this odor? It is not in the wood, it is not in the water. Whence comes it?" She was silent. He repeated the question 3 times, yet she made no answer. But when the question had been asked for the 4th time, Coyote jumped out of his hiding place into the middle of the lodge and cried, "It is I, my brothers-in-law." "Run out there," the brothers commanded, and turning to their sister they said, "Run out you with him." They both departed from the lodge. As Coyote went out, he took a brand from the fire, and with this he lighted a new fire. Then he broke boughs from the neighboring trees and built a shelter for himself and his wife to live in. When this was completed, she went back to the lodge of her brothers, took out her pots, skins, 4 awls, baskets, and all her property, and carried them to her new home. One of the elder brothers said to the youngest, "Go out tonight and watch the couple, and see what sort of a man this is that we have for a brother-in-law. Do not enter the shelter, but lie hidden outside and observe them." So the youngest brother went forth and hid himself near the shelter, where he could peep in and see by the light of the fire what took place and hear what was said. The pair sat side by side near the fire. Presently the woman laid her hand in a friendly manner on Coyote's knee, but Coyote threw it away. These motions were repeated 4 times, and when he had thrown her hand away for the 4th time, he said, "I have sworn never to take a woman for a wife until I have killed her 4 times. For a while the woman remained silent and gazed at the fire. At length she said, "Here I am. Do with me as you will." The myth then relates 4 deaths and resurrections of the woman, similar to those of the coyote, but it does not state how or where she preserved her vital principle. When she returned for the 4th time she lay down, and Coyote soon followed her to her couch. From time to time during the night, they held long, low conversations, of which the listener could hear but little. At dawn, the watcher went home. In reply to the questions of his brothers, he said, "I cannot tell you all that I saw and heard, and they said much that I could not hear, but all that I did hear and behold was seemed as devilish, evil." Next morning the brothers proposed to go out hunting. While they were getting ready, Coyote came and asked leave to join them, but they said to him tauntingly, "No, stay at home with your wife. She may be lonely and may need someone to talk to her," and they chased him out of the lodge. Just as they were about to leave, he came back again and begged them to take him with them. "No," they replied, "the woman will want you to carry wood. You must stay at home with her." They bade him be gone and set out on their journey. They had not gone far on their way when he overtook them, and for the 3rd time asked to be allowed to join the party, but again they drove him back with scornful words. They traveled on till they came to the edge of a deep canyon bordered with very steep cliffs, and here Coyote was seen again, skulking behind them. For the 4th time he pleaded with them, but now the youngest brother took his part and suggested that Coyote might assist in driving game towards them. So, after some deliberation, they consented to take Coyote along. At the edge of the canyon they made a bridge of rainbow, on which they proceeded to cross the chasm. Before the brothers reached the opposite bluff, Coyote jumped on it from the bridge with a great bound and began to frolic around, saying, "This is a nice place to play." They traveled farther on, and after a while came to a mesa or tableland, which projected into a lower plain and was connected with the plateau on which they stood by a narrow neck of level land. It was a mesa much like that on which the 3 eastern towns of the Moquis stand, with high precipitous sides and a narrow entrance. On the neck of land they observed the tracks of 4 Rocky Mountain sheep, which had gone in on the mesa but had not returned. They had reason, therefore, to believe that the sheep were still on the mesa. At the neck they built a fire, sat down near it, and sent Coyote in on the mesa to drive the sheep out. Their plans were successful. Soon the 4 sheep came running out over the neck, within easy range of the hunter's weapons, and were all killed. Presently Coyote returned and lay down on the sand. In those days the horns of the Rocky Mountain sheep were flat and fleshy and could be eaten. The eldest brother said, "I will take the horns for my share." "No," said Coyote, "the horns shall be mine. Give them to me." 3 times each repeated the same declaration. When both had spoken for the 4th time, the eldest brother, to end the controversy, drew out his knife and began to cut one of the horns. As he did so, Coyote cried out, "Tseen until he, tseen until he, tseen until he, tseen until he. Turn to bone, turn to bone, turn to bone, turn to bone." Each time he cried, the horn grew harder and harder, and the knife slipped as it cut, hacking but not severing the horn. This is why the horns of the Rocky Mountain sheep are now hard, not fleshy, and to this day they bear the marks of the hunter's knife. "Tsindi, tsindis bil no ti." "You devil, you evil companion in travel," said the hunter to Coyote. The hunters gathered all the meat into one pile, and by means of the mystic power which they possessed, they reduced it to a very small compass. They tied it in a small bundle which one person might easily carry, and they gave it to Coyote to take home, saying to him, "Travel round by the head of the canyon over which we crossed, and go not through it, for they are evil people who dwell there, and open not your bundle until you get home." The bundle was lifted to his back, and he started for home, promising to heed all that had been told him. But as soon as he was well out of sight of his companions, he slipped his bundle to the ground and opened it. At once the meat expanded and became again a heap of formidable size, such that he could not bind it up again or carry it. So he hung some of it up on the trees and bushes. He stuck part of it into crevices in the rocks. A portion he left scattered on the ground. He tied up as much as he could carry in a new bundle, and with this he continued on his journey. When he came to the edge of the forbidden canyon, he looked down and saw some birds playing a game he had never witnessed before. They rolled great stones down the slope, which extended from the foot of the cliff to the bottom of the valley, and stood on the stones while they were rolling. Yet the birds were not upset or crushed or hurt in the least by this diversion. The sight so pleased Coyote that he descended into the canyon and begged to be allowed to join in the sport. The birds rolled a stone gently for him. He got on it and handled himself so nimbly that he reached the bottom of the slope without injury. Again and again he begged them to give him a trial, until he thus 3 times descended without hurting himself. When he asked the birds for the 4th time to roll a stone for him, they became angry and hurled it with such force that Coyote lost his footing, and he and the stone rolled over one another to the bottom of the slope, and he screamed and yelped all the way down. After this experience, he left the birds and traveled on until he observed some otters at play by the stream at the bottom of the canyon. They were playing the Navajo game of Nanzos. They bet their skins against one another on the results of the game. But when one lost his skin at play, he jumped into the water and came out with a new skin. Coyote approached the otters and asked to be allowed to take part in the game, but the otters had heard about him and knew what a rascal he was. They refused him and told him to be gone, but still he remained and pleaded. After a while they went apart and talked among themselves, and when they returned, they invited Coyote to join them in their game. Coyote bet his skin and lost it. The moment he lost, the otters all rushed at him, and notwithstanding his piteous cries, they tore the hide from his back, beginning at the root of his tail and tearing forward. When they came to the vital spot at the end of his nose, his wails were terrible. When he found himself denuded of his skin, he jumped into the water, as he had seen the otters doing, but alas, his skin did not come back to him. He jumped again and again into the water, but came out every time as bare as he went in. At length he became thoroughly exhausted, and lay down in the water until the otters took pity on him and pulled him out. They dragged him to a badger hole, threw him in there, and covered him up with earth. Previous to this adventure, Coyote had a beautiful smooth fur like that of the otter. When he dug his way out of the badger hole, he was again covered with hair, but it was no longer the glossy fur which he once wore. It was coarse and rough, much like that of the badger, and such a pelt the coyotes have worn ever since. But this sad experience did not make him mend his ways. He again went round challenging the otters to further play, and betting his new skin on the game. "Your skin is of no value, no one would play for it. Begone," they said. Being often refused and insolently treated, he at length became angry, retired to a safe distance, and began to revile the otters shamefully. "You are braggarts," he cried. "You pretend to be brave, but you are cowards. Your women are like yourselves, their heads are flat, their eyes are little, their teeth stick out, they are ugly, while I have a bride as beautiful as the sun." He shook his foot at them as if to say, "I am fleeter than you." He would approach them, and when they made motion as if to pursue him, he would take a big jump and soon place himself beyond their reach. When they quieted down, he would approach them again and continue to taunt and revile them. After a while he went to the cliff, to a place of safety, and shouted from there his words of derision. The otters talked together, and said they could suffer his abuse no longer, that something must be done, and they sent word to the chiefs of the spiders, who lived farther down the stream, telling them what had occurred and asking for their aid. The spiders crept up the bluff, went round behind where Coyote sat cursing and scolding, and wove strong webs in the trees and bushes. When their work was finished, they told the otters what they had done, and the latter started to climb the bluff and attack Coyote. Conscious of his superior swiftness, he acted as if indifferent to them, and allowed them to come quite close before he turned to run, but he did not run far until he was caught in the webs of the spiders. Then the otters seized him and dragged him, howling, to the foot of the hill. He clung so hard to the grasses and shrubs as he passed that they were torn out by the roots. When the otters got him to the bottom of the hill, they killed him, or seemed to kill him. The cliff swallows, Hesosi, flew down from the walls of the canyon and tore him in pieces. They carried off the fragments to their nests, leaving only a few drops of blood on the ground. They tore his skin into strips and made of these bands which they put around their heads, and this accounts for the band which the cliff swallow wears upon his brow today. It was nightfall when the brothers came home. They saw that Coyote had not yet returned, and they marveled what had become of him. When they entered the lodge and sat down, the sister came and peeped in over the portiere, scanned the inside of the lodge, and looked inquiringly at them. They did not speak to her until she had done this 4 times. Then the eldest brother said, "Go back and sleep, and don't worry about that worthless man of yours. He is not with us, and we know not what has become of him. We suppose he has gone into the canyon, where we warned him not to go, and has been killed." She only said, "What have you done with him?" and went away in anger. Before they lay down to sleep, they sent the youngest brother out to hide where he had hidden the night before to watch their sister, and this is what he saw. At first she pretended to go to sleep. After a while she rose and sat facing the east. Then she faced in turn the south, the west, and the north, moving sunwise. When this was done, she pulled out her right eye tooth, broke a large piece from one of her 4 bone awls, and inserted it in the place of the tooth, making a great tusk where the little tooth had once been. As she did this, she said aloud, "He who shall hereafter dream of losing a right eye tooth shall lose a brother." After this, she opened her mouth to the 4 points of the compass in the order in which she had faced them before, tore out her left eye tooth, and inserted in its place the pointed end of another awl. As she made this tusk, she said, "He who dreams of losing his left eye tooth shall lose a sister." The watcher then returned to his brothers and told them what he had seen and heard. "Go back," said they, "and watch her again, for you have not seen all her deeds." When he went back, he saw her make, as she had done before, 2 tusks in her lower jaw. When she had made that on the right, she said, "He who dreams of losing this tooth, right lower canine, shall lose a child." And when she made that on the left, she said, "He who dreams of losing this tooth, left lower canine, shall lose a parent." When she first began to pull out her teeth, hair began to grow on her hands, As she went on with her mystic work, the hare spread up her arms and her legs, leaving only her breasts bare. The young man now crept back to the lodge where his brethren waited and told them what he had seen. "Go back," they said, "and hide again. There is more for you to see." When he got back to his hiding place, the hair had grown over her breasts, and she was covered with a coat of shaggy hair like that of a bear. She continued to move around in the direction of the sun's apparent course, pausing and opening her mouth at the east, the south, the west, and the north as she went. After a while her ears began to wag, her snout grew long, her teeth were heard to gnash, her nails turned into claws. He watched her until dawn, when, fearing he might be discovered, he returned to his lodge and told his brothers all that had happened. They said, "These must be the mysteries that Coyote explained to her the first night." In a moment after the young man had told his story, they heard the whistling of a bear, and soon a she-bear rushed past the door of the lodge, cracking the branches as she went. She followed the trail which Coyote had taken the day before and disappeared in the woods. At night she came back groaning. She had been in the fatal canyon all day, fighting the slayers of Coyote, and she had been wounded in many places. Her brothers saw a light in her hut, and from time to time one of their number would go and peep in through an aperture to observe what was happening within. All night she walked around the fire. At intervals she would, by means of her magic, draw arrowheads out of her body and heal the wounds. Next morning the bear woman again rushed past the lodge of her brethren, and again went off toward the fatal canyon. At night she returned, as before, groaning and bleeding, and again spent the long night in drawing forth missiles and healing her wounds by means of her magic rites. Thus she continued to do for 4 days and 4 nights, but at the end of the 4th day she had conquered all her enemies, she had slain many, and those she had not killed she had dispersed. The swallows flew up into the high cliffs to escape her vengeance, the otters hid themselves in the water, the spiders retreated into holes in the ground, and in such places these creatures have been obliged to dwell ever since. During these 4 days, the brothers remained in their camp, but at the end of that time, feeling that trouble was in store for them, they decided to go away. They left the youngest brother at home, and the remaining 10 divided themselves into 4 different parties, one of which traveled to the east, another to the south, another to the west, and another to the north. When they were gone, the whirlwind, Neol, and the knife boy, Pesisike, came to the lodge to help the younger brother who had remained behind. They dug for him a hole under the center of the hogan, and from this they dug 4 branching tunnels, running east, south, west, and north, and over the end of each tunnel they put a window of gypsum to let in light from above. They gave him 4 weapons, Atsinekliska, the chain lightning arrow, Hatsoilhalka, an old-fashioned stone knife as big as the open hand, Natsili Tike, the rainbow arrow, and Hatsilkiska, the sheet lightning arrow. They roofed his hiding place with 4 flat stones, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 yellow, and 1 black. They put earth over all these, smoothing the earth and tramping it down so that it should look like the natural floor of the lodge. They gave him 2 monitors, Nilutsi, the wind, at his right ear, to warn him by day of the approach of danger, and Zaliel, darkness, at his left ear, to warn him by night. When morning came and the bear woman went forth, she discovered that her brothers had departed. She poured water on the ground, Holly, Z, to see which way they had gone. The water flowed to the east. She rushed on in that direction and soon overtook 3 of the fugitives, whom she succeeded in killing. Then she went back to her hut to see what had become of her other brothers. Again she poured water on the level ground and it flowed off to the south. She followed in that direction and soon overtook 3 others, whom she likewise slew. Returning to the lodge, she again performed her divination by means of water. This time she was directed to the west, and going that way, she overtook and killed 3 more of the men. Again she sought the old camp and poured on the ground water, which flowed to the north. Going on in this direction she encountered but 1 man, and him she slew. Once more she went back to discover what had become of her last brother. She poured water for the 5th time on the level ground. It sank directly into the earth. The brothers had always been very successful hunters, and their home was always well supplied with meat. In consequence of this, they had had many visitors who built in their neighborhood temporary shelters, such as the Navajos build now when they come to remain only a short time at a place, and the remains of these shelters surrounded the deserted hut. She scratched in all these places to find traces of the fugitive, without success, and in doing so she gradually approached the deserted hut. She scratched all around outside the hut, and then went inside. She scratched around the edge of the hut, and then worked toward the center, until at length she came to the fireplace. Here she found the earth was soft, as if recently disturbed, and she dug rapidly downward with her paws. She soon came to the stones, and, removing these, saw her last remaining brother hidden beneath them. "I greet you, my younger brother. Come up, I want to see you," she said in a coaxing voice. Then she held out one finger to him and said, "Grasp my finger and I will help you up." But Wind told him not to grasp her finger, that if he did she would throw him upwards, that he would fall half dead at her feet and be at her mercy. "Get up without her help," whispered Nilsi. He climbed out of the hole on the east side and walked toward the east. She ran toward him in a threatening manner, but he looked at her calmly and said, "It is I, your younger brother." Then she approached him in a coaxing way, as a dog approaches one with whom he wishes to make friends, and she led him back toward the deserted hogan. But as he approached it, the wind whispered, "We have had sorrow there, let us not enter," so he would not go in, and this is the origin of the custom now among the Navajos, never to enter a house in which death had occurred. 91. "Come," she then said, "and sit with your face to the west, and let me comb your hair." It was now late in the afternoon. "Heed her not," whispered Wind. "Sit facing the north, that you watch her shadow and see what she does. It is thus that she has killed your brothers." They both sat down, she behind him, and she untied his queue and proceeded to arrange his hair, while he watched her out of the corner of his eye. Soon he observed her snout growing longer and approaching his head, and he noticed that her ears were wagging. "What does it mean that your snout grows longer and that your ears move so?" he asked. She did not reply, but drew her snout in and kept her ears still. When these occurrences had taken place for the fourth time, Wind whispered in his ear, "Let not this happen again. If she puts out her snout the fifth time, she will bite your head off. Yonder, where you see that chattering squirrel, are her vital parts. He guards them for her. Now run and destroy them." He rose and ran toward the vital parts, and she ran after him. Suddenly, between them a large yucca sprang up to retard her steps, and then a cane cactus, and then another yucca, and then another cactus of a different kind. She ran faster than he, but was so delayed in running around the plants that he reached the vitals before her and heard the lungs breathing under the weeds that covered them. He drew forth his chain lightning arrow, shot it into the weeds, and saw a bright stream of blood spurting up. At the same instant the bear woman fell with the blood streaming from her side. "See," whispered Nilsi, the wind. "The stream of blood from her body and the stream from her vitals flow fast and approach one another. If they meet, she will revive, and then your danger will be greater than ever. Draw, with your stone knife, a mark on the ground between the approaching streams." The young man did as he was bidden, when instantly the blood coagulated and ceased to flow. Then the young man said, "You shall live again, but no longer as the mischievous Ck-Sauce Natalhita. You shall live in other forms, where you may be of service to your kind and not a thing of evil." He cut off the head and said to it, "Let us see if in another life you will do better. When you come to life again, act well, or again I will slay you." He threw the head at the foot of a piñón tree, and it changed into a bear, which started at once to walk off. But presently it stopped, shaded its eyes with one paw, and looked back at the man, saying, "You have bidden me to act well, but what shall I do if others attack me?" "Then you may defend yourself," said the young man, "but begin no quarrel, and be ever a friend to your people, the Dene. Go yonder to Black Mountain, Dsilizian, and dwell there. There are now in Black Mountain many bears which are descended from this bear. The hero cut off the nipples and said to them, "Had you belonged to a good woman and not to a foolish witch, it might have been your luck to suckle men. You were of no use to your kind, but now I shall make you of use in another form." He threw the nipples up into a piñon tree, heretofore fruitless, and they became edible pine nuts. Next, he sought the homes of his friends, the holy ones, Neol and Paisasike. They led him to the east, to the south, to the west, and to the north, where the corpses of his brothers lay, and these they restored to life for him. They went back to the place where the brothers had dwelt before and built a new house, but they did not return to the old home, for that was now a Tsindi Hogan and a cursed. 91. The holy ones then gave to the young hero the name of Leoneani, or reared under the ground, because they had hidden him in the earth when his brethren fled from the wrath of his sister. They bade him go and dwell at a place called Ataioi, Big Point on the Edge, which is in the shape of a Hogan, or Navajo hut, and here we think he still dwells.